And I'm at the hour. So, hello to at least Abba and perhaps anyone else who happens to be around. So, I need to do I need to sit down and write myself like a little intro here because I'm never sure what to say when we start these out. But hello to everyone. For anyone who is new here, my name is SkitterSkreetch. You can call me Skitters, and I'm a little rat inside of a very large library, of which this is but a small part. Now, what are we doing today? Well, first things first, Abbe, thanks for showing up and claiming the first, so let's quickly do that. That's lucky number 12. One away from an unlucky number there, Abbe. Well, suffering from success almost. Right. That's done. What else are we doing? So, yeah, today we're going to be doing some ghost stories, specifically a couple more of the M.R. Jameses. Let's go have a look at them. So last time we finished up with an episode of Cathedral History, which were quite good. So we're going to be moving on to two chapters. Oh yeah, I've got some new books in today. I don't normally talk about them, but then normally I'm sort of straight into the books, but Lamp's been making me do the whole talk about stuff to wait for the intro. So I guess we could go over some of the new ones. So this one's probably the biggest big one, which is For Whom the Bell Tolls by Ernest Hemingway. That's a neat one. What else did we get today? Oh yeah, if you look to my left here, you'll see a couple more Charles Dickens's. We got Oliver Twist and we got Hard Times. Then directly above me, we also have a new one by George Orwell, Coming Up for Air. Yeah, a few little neat ones. So yeah, I spent my day out getting more of them, so I thought worth noting. Yeah, but that's about all for the new though. So shall we be out about our normal introduction? I've been telling you guys stuff about the library, haven't I? It's really the archive. The archive lab is very strict about me calling it that. But yeah, so we've been covering the beasts, and what beasts have we talked about? We talked about the Whistler specifically. We talked about a few groups. So there's only really one group left to do, and I've been putting it off because it's sort of a tricky one. So I mentioned when we was talking about the actual geography of the library, the archive, that there were four main types of labs in the lower section, and that was Carnomancy, Summoning, Alchemy, and Golomancy. I've done the ones that are made from Carnomancy, the the abominations. I've done the sort of malfunction golems, and the alchemy things. Like alchemy stuff isn't animate enough to be its own type of beast. It just modifies other stuff. So what's really left to talk about is the stuff that comes out of the Summoning lab. Now, generally I think of them as demons, but Lamp says that's not a good way to think of them. I mean, Lamp says a lot of stuff. He talks about extroverted summoning or extra plane. No, it's not. It's not extra. Evocative summoning. That's what he talks. He talks about evocative summoning and the nature of consensus reality, and extraplanar beasts, and non-physical versus metaphysical. He goes on and on about it. So, with the caveat before I say this, that these are totally not demons in like the biblical or whatever sense. Let's talk about the demons. I just call them demons. They're demons basically. And now the thing you've got to keep in mind about the demons as beasts is most demons isn't actually physically here, right? Like from what I can tell, when you see sort of the picture, like the sort of red guys with the horns and the hooves and that, those aren't like actual physical bodies that they have. Those are things that are created for them by like the wizard who summons them. So your general being that is summoned isn't going to have a physical form. They're going to exist as sort of like something like a ghost almost, right? But not like a ghost in the floating there and you can see it sort of thing, because that's ectoplasmic. That's weird. I don't know, but like a presence that isn't there, right? The idea of a thing. And they can move about and they can sometimes interact with the world a bit. But in order to do things, really, what they've got to do is they've got to take form. And so what most of them will do is they'll possess something. And the best option in a lot of these cases is the other things, the golems or the abominations, the things made from the other labs. Those are pretty primo choices for them. And so a lot of them is in those things, just changing those things. But the things that are mostly demonic in themselves is real nasty, and you sort of got to watch out for them. So I mentioned that I suspect that the Whistler is physical, but I'm not sure exactly how. And I won't go into him right now, because again, I don't fully understand him. But of the other things, the non-physical, or the non-Whistler demons, they tend to be nasty, is what I'll say. Like Lamp says that not everything that comes out of extrovert or extrovert, whatever, well, not all the things that get summoned by wizards is nasty, but the things they took down in the labs is pretty nasty by general rule. And so they take forms based on things that are in the library. And theoretically they can take anything over, right? Like they can possess like a chair or my gun or something like that, right? And in taking that over, they would have some power over it. Not an unlimited amount. I don't know they could do much as a chair. With my gun, they might be able to work the mechanisms, but since it's not loaded, that wouldn't do it much good. But when they're inside of a thing, they can do what that thing is sort of intended or able to do. Which, given how many cursed and magical objects there are in here, and you know that's a pretty rich ground for choices. So sometimes you'll see certain horrible magical objects that are, acting in ways that they normally wouldn't do on their own. And that's pretty nasty. But what really gets to me is when they do something a bit more weird, right? I mean, everything they do is weird. But sometimes they'll get sort of creative with it, and that's the worst. That's the demons getting like clever with it is some of the only times I've actually had to go out of my way to intervene and sort of deal with beasts, like in the sense of like fighting them. Fighting's the wrong. I don't fight them. Like, not man or whatever. But sometimes I do have to deal with the beasts. Right. That's just the case. And there's a couple of instances that stream the mind. Now, one of them is when one of them got in his head to possess pages. Right. I've mentioned the panes, the sort of paper cranes made out of the loose pages, a magical thing that sort of were around. And one of them got him in his head that he could take over a swarm of these. And so he found a big swarm, and he became a sort of malevolent intelligence at the centre of these things, and that were dangerous. Like this thing were, like it was sort of like a living storm of paper, right? This shifting and changing and taking horrid form, right? And that were bad. The other time were I don't even know if that were intentional. Lamp thinks it wasn't, but there is an artifact, an hand mirror, in one of the vaults that not like the lowest vaults, but somewhere in there, where it contains darkness in some like weird way. It doesn't like I don't know the exact details, but basically it takes in darkness, like it holds it as like an active force, like it gathers it up the way that light can be gathered up by a mirror. But sort of I don't know the specifics. But Lamp reckons it was just trying to take the mirror, but it got the darkness, the like reservoir that it had stored. And so you had this sort of shape of creeping living shadow that would sort of stalk through things and move through spaces. And that was really bad. That was really bad indeed. But like I said, sometimes I deal with these demons, those two I dealt with. And the way I do that is the library is, for all it's a terrible place to be for like a living being, it's much worse for demons. Like, I talk about the wards a lot. We'll take a little zoom out here so you can see the line at the bottom there of the wards. Now these things run throughout the library, right? They do all sorts of stuff. They like manage stuff and they move stuff around and they clean and they keep out pests and they do all sorts of things. But what they do more than anything else is they don't let demons in. Like they are made to destroy demons with prejudice. And so, any of the demons that make it by have to sort of move between them in a way. It's tricky for them to navigate. And so, in both cases, what I wound up doing was essentially luring them into a place where the wards could be shifted so they would get pushed through. And what happens to demons when they go through wards is not pretty. If you've ever seen, when that, like the machines they use to make pasta, like the hand-turned ones, where you feed the dough in and it gets flatter and flatter and then comes out as a bunch of little strings? Imagine that, but only if, instead of just going through one roller and coming out as one string, then those strings would then go through another roller and come out as even smaller strings and more stretched until, boom. real nasty stuff. Yeah, would not recommend being a demon in here or like anything extra anything. I don't know how the guy in the book gets away with it. He's apparently he's different. He's not an extra. Why am I forgetting these words? You'd think I'd remember them by now. Evocative summon. That's it. He's not an evocative summon. He's he's something else anyway. I'm not totally clear on what he is. But yeah, that's what happens to the demons if they fuck up. And you think realistically, wow, that's a good way to that's a good thing to have for demons. You should destroy all of them like that. And I do if I can get like an easy chance to leave one in. But one of the things that is wrong with the deep lab summoning things is generally it's tricky to bring something into the world that isn't in the world, be that a demon or whatever. And so the things that were done down there, they did something to the world and what Lamp calls consensus reality to make it easier for things to get in. And so occasionally stuff just crawls in through there, and so you get more demons. So it's a sort of an ongoing problem. I think the rate is fairly steady of them coming in and being destroyed. Lamp actually says they've been going down over time, but I don't know. Anyway, it's been 10 minutes, so that is enough time for anyone who's going to be running a bit late to filter in. So I think we'll start moving over to to do our story for the day while I have a quick drink. Oh, I meant to say, by the way, if anyone has any questions about any of the library stuff, the beasts or whatever, do let me know. Or just about the library in general. I do need to come up with more topics because I'm running out of sorts of beasts to talk about. And unless you guys have anything specifically you want to know about the library, probably what I'll start doing next is talking about some of the cursed objects in here. Just because, yeah. But, yeah. Other than that, we're going to start off today with 2 doctors and make our way along until we get bored. And as always, of course, if I've said something or read something too fast and you've missed it, or if there's a technical issue and you've missed a part of the story and you want me to go back over it, or if you just have comments, questions, anything at all, any reason at all, just let me know in the chat, and I'm happy to stop, take a moment, and go back over things for you. Other than that, I don't think there's much else to say. I'll have another quick drink because it's always good to do that while you remember. Yeah, that's good. Anyway, without any further ado then, if no one has any questions, then I shall begin. 2 doctors. It is a very common thing in my experience to find papers shut up in old books, but one of the rarest things to come across any such that are at all interesting. Still, it does happen, and one should never destroy them unlooked at. Now, it were a practice of mine before the war, occasionally to buy old ledgers, of which the paper were good, and which possessed a good many blank leaves, and extract these and use them for my own notes and writings. One such I purchased for a small sum in 1911. It was tightly clasped, and its boards were warped by having for years been obliged to embrace a number of extraneous sheets. 3/4 of this inserted matter had lost all vestige of importance for any living human being. One bundle had not. That it belonged to a lawyer is certain, for it is endorsed, the strangest case I have ever yet met, and bears initials and address in Gray's Inn. It is only materials for a case, and consists of statements by possible witnesses. The man, who would have been the defendant or prisoner, seems never to have appeared. The dossier is not complete, but, as such, it furnishes a riddle in which the supernatural appears to play a part. You must see what you can make of it. The following is the setting and the tale as I elicit it. The scene is Islington in 1718, and the time of the month June. A countrified place, therefore, and a pleasant season. Dr. Abel was walking in his garden one afternoon, waiting for his horse to be brought round that he might set out for his visits for the day. To him entered his confidential servant, Luke Jennett, who had been with him 20 years. I said I wished to speak to him, and what I had to say might take some quarter of an hour. He accordingly bade me go into his study, which was a room opening on the terrace path where he was walking, and came in himself and sat down. I told him that, much against my will, I must look out for another place. He inquired what was my reason in consideration I had been so long with him. I said if he would excuse me, he would not do me a great kindness, because, this appears to have been common form even in 1718, I was one that he always liked to have everything pleasant about me. As well as I can remember, he said that was his case likewise, but he would wish to know why I should change my mind after so many years, and, says he, you know there can be no talk of remembrance of you in my will if you leave the service now. I said I had made my reckoning of that. Then, says he, you must have some complaint to make, and if I could I would willingly set it right. And at that I told him, not seeing how I could keep it back, the matter of my foremost affidavit and of the bedstuff in the dispensing room, and said that a house where such things happened was no place for me, and which he, looking very black upon me, said no more, but called me fool, and said he would pay what was owing me in the morning. And so his horse being waiting went out. So for that night I lodged with my sister's husband near Battle Bridge, and I came early next morning to my late master, who then made a great matter that I had not lain in his house and stopped a crown out of my wages owing. After that I took service here and there, not for long at a time, and so saw no more of him till I came to be Dr. Quin's man at Dodd's Hall in Islington. There is one very obscure part in this statement, namely the reference to the former affidavit in the matter of the bedstuff. The former affidavit is not in the bundle of papers. It is to be feared that it was taken out to be read because of its special oddity, and not put back. Of what nature the story was may be guessed later, but as yet no clue has been put into our hands. The rector of Islington, Jonathan Pratt, is the next to step forward. He furnishes particulars of the standing and reputation of Dr. Abel and Dr. Quinn, both of whom lived and practised in his parish. It should not be supposed, he says, that a physician should be a regular attendant at morning and evening prayers, or at the Wednesday lectures. But within the measure of their ability, I would say that both these persons fulfilled their obligations as loyal members of the Church of England. At the same time, as you desire my private mind, I must say, in the language of the schools, distinguo. Dr. A was to me a source of perplexity, Dr. Q to my eyes a plain, honest believer, not inquiring over very closely into points of belief, but squaring his practice to what lights he had. The other interested himself in questions to which Providence, as I hold, designs no answer to be given in this state. He would ask me, for example, what place I believed those being now to hold in the scheme of creation, whereby some are thought neither to have stood fast when the rebel angels fell, nor to have joined with them to the full pitch of their transgressions. As was suitable, my first answer to him was a question. What warrant had he for supposing any such being to exist? Hey, Anaska, good to have you. Just to quickly summarise what we've been up to, or where we're at in the story. Fella buys old ledgers to use the paper on them. He's found a stack of documents by a lawyer, mostly interviews from witnesses, to a case that there is a little bit of uncertainty about. The first was from a servant of the, I think, accused, who talked about leaving his service, referring to another case of which we have no documents, and this is a member of the church who was talking about the two doctors who were involved in the historical two doctors' faith and church services. One, he said, is a plain if uninterested man who sort of generally swears, and the second one is now asking about the nature of the angels who didn't rebel against God in Lucifer's rebellion, but didn't stand with him either, and sort of stood neutral. As was suitable, my first answer to him was a question. What warrant had he for supposing any such beings to exist? For that there were none in Scripture, I took it he were aware. It appeared, for as I am on the subject, the whole tale may be given, that he grounded himself on such passages as that of the satyr which Jerome tells us conversed with Antony. But though, too, some parts of Scripture might be cited in support, and besides, said he, you notice the universal belief among those that spend their days and nights abroad, and I would add that if your calling took you so continuously as it does me about the country lanes by night, you might not be so surprised as I see you to be by my suggestion. You are then of John Milton's mind, I said, and hold that millions of spiritual creatures walk the earth, unseen, both when we wake and when we sleep. I do not know, he said, why Milton should take upon himself to say unseen. Tenor! Thank you for the subscription. I very much appreciate it. And yeah, thank you for being here. I'm very glad of your company. I'm going to take it that you heard my last summary of the events, but if you didn't, let me know and I'll re-summarise the story. But I'm hoping that you did, because I did just summarise it about half a page ago. Yeah. Thank you all for being here. I do appreciate it so much. I do not know, he said, why Milton should take upon himself to say unseen, though to be sure he was blind when he wrote that. But for the rest, why, yes, I think he was in the right. Well, I said, though not so often as you, I am not seldom called abroad pretty late. But I have no mind of meeting a satyr out in our Islington lanes in all the years I have been here, and if you have had the better luck, I am sure the Royal Society would be glad to know of it. Oh, good. I am reminded of these trifling expressions because Dr. A took them so ill, stamping out of the room in a huff with some such word as these high and dry parsons had no eyes but for prayer book or a pint of wine. But this was not the only time that our conversation took a remarkable turn. There was an evening when he came in, at first seeming gay and in good spirits, but afterwards, as he sat and smoked by the fire, falling into a musing way. Out of which, to rouse him, I said pleasantly that I supposed he had no meetings of late with his old friends, or with his odd friends. A question which did effectively arouse him, for he looked most wildly, and as if scared upon me, and said, "You were never there. I did not see you. Who brought you?" And then in a more collected tone, "What was this about a meeting? I believe I must have been in a doze." To which I answered that I was thinking of fauns and centaurs in the dark lane, and not of a witch's Sabbath. But it seems he took it differently. "Well," said he, "I can plead guilty to neither, but I find you very much more of a sceptic than becomes your cloth. If you care to know about the dark lane, you might do worse than to ask my housekeeper that lived at the other end of it when she was a child." "Yes," said I, "and the old woman in the almshouse, and the children in their kennel. If I were you, I would send to your brother Quinn for a bolus to clear your brains." "Damn Quinn," says he. "Talk no more of him. He's embezzled 4 of my best patients this month. I believe he's that cursed man of his, Janet, that used to be with me. His tongue is never still. It should be nailed to the pillory if he had his deserts." This, I may say, was the only time of his showing me that he had any grudge against either Dr. Quinn or Janet, and as was my business, I did my best to persuade him he was mistaken in them. Yet it could not be denied that some respectable families in the parish had given him the cold shoulder, and for no reason that they were willing to allege. The end was that he said he had not done so ill at Islington, but that he could afford to live at ease elsewhere when he chose, and anyhow he bore Dr. Quinn no malice. I think I now remember what observations of mine drew him into the train of thought which he next pursued. It was, I believe, my mentioning some juggling tricks which my brother in the East Indies had seen at the court of the Rajah of Mysore. "A convenient thing enough, Doctor." "Eh, well, thank you for looking," said Dr. Abel to me. "If by some arrangement a man could get the powers of communicating motion and energy to inanimate objects, as if the act should move itself against him that lifts it, something of that kind. Well, I don't know that was in my mind so much. But if you could summon such a volume from your shelf, or even order it to open at the right page." He was sitting by the fire. It was a cold evening, and stretched out his hand that way, and just then the firearms, or at least the poker, fell over towards him with a great clatter, and I did not hear what else he said. But I told him that I could not easily conceive of an arrangement, as he called it, of such a kind that would not include, as one of its conditions, a heavier payment than any Christian would care to make, which he assented. "But," he said, "I have no doubt these bargains can be made very tempting, very persuasive. Still, you would not favour them, eh, Doctor?" "No, I suppose not." This is as much as I knew of Dr. Abel's mind, and the feeling between these men. Dr. Quinn, as I said, was a plain, honest creature, a man to whom I would have gone. Indeed, I have before now gone to him for advice on matters of business. He was, however, every now and then, particularly of late, not exempt from troublesome fancies. There was certainly a time when he was so much harassed by his dreams that he could not keep them to himself, but would tell them to his acquaintances, and among them to me. I was at supper at his house, and he was not inclined to let me leave him at my usual time. If you go, he said, there will be nothing for it, but I must go to bed and dream of the chrysalis. You might be worse off, said I. I do not think it, he said, and he shook himself like a man who is displeased with the complexion of his thoughts. I only meant, said I, that a chrysalis is an innocent thing. This one is not, he said, and I do not care to think of it. However, sooner than lose my company, he was fain to tell me, for I pressed him, that this was a dream which had come to him several times of late, and even more than once in a night. It was to this effect that he seemed to himself to wake under an extreme compulsion to rise and go out of doors. So he would dress himself and go down to his garden door. By the door there stood a spade which he must take and go out into the garden, and at a particular place in the shrubbery, somewhat clear and upon which the moon shone, there was always in his dream a full moon, and he would feel himself forced to dig. After some time the spade would uncover something light-coloured, which he would perceive to be a stuff, linen or woolen, and this he must clear with his hands. It was always the same, of the size of a man and shaped like the chrysalis of a moth, with the fold showing a promise of an opening at one end. He could not describe how gladly he would have left that stage and run to the house, but he must not escape so easily. So with many groans, and knowing only too well what to expect, he patted those folds of stuff, or as it has sometimes seemed to be, membrane, and disclosed a head covered with a smooth pink skin, which, breaking as the creature stirred, showed him his own face in a state of death. The telling of this so much disturbed him that I was forced out of mere compassion to sit with him the greater part of the night, and talk with him upon indifferent subjects. He said that upon every recurrence of this dream he woke and found himself, as it were, fighting for his breath. I'm going to pause here to take a quick drink. Another extract from Luke Janet's long continuous statement comes in at this point. I never told tales of my master, Dr. Abel, to anybody in the neighbourhood. When I was in another service, I remember to have spoken to my fellow servants about the matter of the bedstuff, but I'm sure I never said either I or he was the persons connected, and it met with so little credit that I were affronted and thought best to keep it to myself. And when I come back to Islington, I found Dr. Abel still there, who I was told had left the parish. I'll clear that it behoved me to use great discretion, for indeed I were afraid of the man, and it is certain I were no party to spread any ill report of him. My master, Dr. Quim, were a very just, honest man, and no maker of mischief. I'm sure he never stirred a finger, or said a word by way of inducement to a soul to make them leave going to Dr. Abel and come to him. Nay, he would hardly be persuaded to attend them that came, until he were convinced that if he did not, they would send into the doubt for a physician rather than do as they had hitherto done. I believe it may be proved that Dr. Abel came into my master's house more than once. We had a new chambermaid out of Herefordshire, and she asked me who were the gentlemen that were looking after the master, as Dr. Quim, when he were out, and seemed so disappointed that he were out. She said whoever he were, he knew the way of the house well, going at once into the study, and then into the dispensing room, and last into the bedchamber. I made her tell me what he were like, and what she said was suitable enough to Dr. Abel. But besides, she told me she saw the same man at church, and someone told her that was the doctor. It was just after this that my master began to have his bad nights, and complain to me and other persons, and in particular what discomforts he suffered from his pillow and bedclothes. He said he must buy something to suit him, and should do his own marketing, and accordingly brought home a parcel which he said were of the right quality. But where he bought it, we had then no knowledge, only that they was marked in a thread, and with a coronet and a bird. The women said they were of a sort not commonly met with, and very fine. And my master said they was comfortablest he had ever used, and he slept now with both soft and deep. Also the feather pillows was the best and sorted his head would sink into them as if they was a cloud, which I have myself remarked several times when I come to wake him of a morning, his face being almost hid by the pillow closing over it. I had never any communication with Dr. Abel after I come back to Islington, but one day when he passed me in the street and asked me where I was not looking for another service, which I answered I were very well suited where I were, he said I were a tickle-mind fellow, and he doubted not he should soon hear I were on the word again, which indeed proved too. Dr. Pratt is next taken up where he left off. On the 16th, I was called out of my bed soon after it was light, that is about 5, with a message that Dr. Quinn was dead or dying. Making my way to his house, I found there was no doubt which was the truth. All the persons in the house, except the one that let me in, were already in his chamber, and attending about his bed, but none touching him. He was stretched in the midst of the bed, on his back, without any disorder, and indeed had the appearance of one ready laid out for burial. His hands, I think, were even crossed across his breast. The only thing not usual was that nothing was to be seen of his face, the two ends of the pillow or bolster appearing to be closed quite over it. These I immediately pulled apart, at the same time rebuking those present, and especially the man, and at once coming to the assistance of his master. He, however, only looked at me and shook his head, having evidently no more hope than myself that there was anything but a corpse before us. Indeed, it was plain to anyone possessed of the least experience he was not only dead, but had died of suffocation. Nor could it be conceived that his death was accidentally caused by the mere folding of the pillow over his face. How should he, not feeling the oppression, have lifted his hands to put it away? It was not a fold of the sheet which was closely gathered about him, as I now observed, was disordered. The next thing was to procure a physician. I had bethought me of leaving my house, and sent on the messenger who had come to me to Dr. Abel. But I now heard he was away from home, and the nearest surgeon was got, who, however, could tell no more, at least without opening the body, than we already knew. As to any person entering the room with evil purpose, which was the next point to be cleared, it was visible that the bolts of the door were burst from their stanchions, and the stanchions broken away from the door-post by main force, and there was a sufficient body of witnesses, the smith among them, to testify that this had been done but a few minutes before I came. The chamber being, moreover, at the top of the house, the window was neither easy of access nor did it show any sign of an exit made that way, either by marks upon the sill or footprints below upon soft mould. The surgeon's evidence forms, of course, part of the report of the inquest, but since it has nothing but remarks upon the healthy state of the largest organs and the coagulation of blood in various parts of the body, it needs not be reproduced. The verdict was death by the visitation of God. Annexed to the other papers is one which I at first incline to suppose had made its way among them by mistake. Upon further consideration, I think I can divine a reason for its presence. It relates to the rifling of a mausoleum in Middlesex, which stood in a park, now broken up, the property of a noble family which I will not name. The outrage was not that of an ordinary resurrection man. The object, it seemed likely, were theft. The account is blunt and terrible. I shall not quote it. A dealer in the north of London suffered every penalty as a receiver of stolen goods in connection with the affair. And that's the end of the piece. Really? Yes. No missing pages enough, and that's just the end. The two doctors. Huh. That sort of leaves me a bit out, really. I was expecting more out of that. I thought, and it seemed like it was building towards something there, especially that last bit. Well, what can we make of that then? So obviously, your first doctor, Dr. Quinn, well, Dr. Abel, is trafficking with something of some sort. He mentions those angels that didn't rebel against God but didn't support him, the priest, and meeting things on the lane, and making some sort of deals with things for powers, the ability to move things with his mind. I guess there was the fire poker, so maybe he just fully choked this person by suffocation or whatever, but I don't know, that's a bit weird. it really gets me. Like, I mean, obviously, Dr. Abel, or sorry, Dr. Quinn, I should say, just seems like a fairly sort of nice, all-right man, you know. No real qualms, no real problems. Didn't even mean to poach the patients he got from Dr. Abel, but did take him in. And Abel, of course, blamed him for that. So there's the point of vengeance. But I don't understand the sort of line here. Like, obviously, there's some sort of something been committed. And the stolen goods, I don't know what the stolen goods would be. There's another inquest relating to staff. I don't know, I mean, something really strikes me about the specific question of the angels. That feels like a really specific question with like an answer. But I don't know what that answer would be. Lamp? Okay, Lamp says that they are called the Earthbound and he will not talk about them anymore. Which I guess is unhelpful. But okay, so there's something to them. Yeah. Something about a witch's Sabbath and a meeting of friends, or well, of entities around the world. Something stolen from a mausoleum that belonged to an old family and was, I guess, sold to a dealer? I don't know why it would be sold. Earthbound? Was something bound in some object and put away somewhere else? I don't know. I just don't know. That's one that leaves me with more questions than answers. And again, I'm thinking of the question of, is M.R. James writing these as fiction, or are these just accounts he's come across? So in the little introduction, they used to be buying old ledgers to use the paper before the war. That sort of sounds like a very plausible story, you know? I just don't know. I don't think I've got any more to say on the thing, so I'll have a quick drink and then we'll press on the next one, I guess. Very short. Right. So then, our next story. The Haunted Dollhouse. Well, bit on the nose, but I guess we'll go on. I suppose you get stuff of that kind through your hand pretty often, said Mr. Diller, as they pointed him with his stick to an object which shall be described when the time comes. And when he said it, he lied in his throat. I knew that he lied. Not once in 20 years, perhaps not once in a lifetime, could Mr. Chittenden, skilled as he was in ferreting out the forgotten treasures of half a dozen countries, expect to handle such a specimen. It were a collector's palaver, and Mr. Chittenden recognised it as such. Stuff of that kind, Mr. Dillett. It's a museum piece, that is. Well, I suppose there are museums that'll take anything. I've seen one, not as good as that, years back, said Mr. Chittenden thoughtfully. That's not likely to come into the market, and I'm told they have some fine ones of the period over the water. No, I'm only telling you the truth, Mr. Diller, when I say that if you was to place an unlimited order with me for the very best that could be got, and you know I have facilities for getting to know of such things and a reputation to maintain, well, all I can say is I should lead you straight up to that one and say, I can't do no better for you than that, sir. Here, here, said Dr. Dillett, applauding ironically with the end of his stick on the floor of the shop. How much are you sticking the innocent American buyer for it, eh? Oh, I shan't be over hard on the buyer, American or otherwise. You see, it stands the way, Mr. Dillett, and if I knew just a bit more about the pedigree, or just a bit less, Mr. Dillett put in. Ha ha, you have your jokes, sir. No, but as I was saying, if I knew just a little more than what I do about the piece, though anyone can see for themselves it's a genuine thing, every last corner of it, and there's not been one of my men allowed to so much as touch it since it come in the shop, there'd be another figure in the price I'm asking. And what's that, 5 and 20? Multiply that by 3 and you got it, sir. 75's my price, and 50's mine, said Mr. Dillett. The point of agreement were, of course, somewhere between the two. It do not matter exactly where, I think 60 guineas. But half an hour later, the object would be unpacked, and within an hour, Mr. Dillett had called for it in his car and driven away. Mr. Chittenden, holding the cheque in his hands, saw him off from the door with smiles, and returned, still smiling, into the parlour where his wife was making the tea. He stopped at the door. It's gone, he said. Thank God for that, said Mrs. Chittenden, putting down the teapot. And Mr. Dillett, was it? Yes, it was. Well, I'd sooner it was him than another. Oh, I don't know. He ain't a bad fellow, my dear. Maybe not, but in my opinion, he'd be none the worse for a bit of a shaker. Well, if that's your opinion, it's an opinion. It's my opinion he's put himself in the way of getting one. Anyhow, we shan't have no more of it, and that's something to be thankful for. And so Mr. and Mrs. Chittenden sat down to tea. And what of Mr. Dillett and his new acquisition? What it was, the title of this story will have told you. What it will like, I shall have to indicate as well as I can. There only just room enough for it in the car, and Mr. Dillett had to sit with the driver. He had also to go slow, for through the rooms of the doll's house had all been stuffed carefully with soft cotton wool. Jolting were to be avoided, in view of the immense number of small objects which thronged them, and the 10-mile drive were an anxious time for him, in spite of all the precautions he insisted upon. At last his front door were reached, and Collins, the butler, come out. "Look here, Collins, you must help me with this thing. It's a delicate job. You must get it out upright, see? It's full of little things that mustn't be displaced more than we can help. Let's see, where shall we have it?" After a pause for consideration. "Really, I think I shall have it put in my own room to begin with, at any rate. On the big table, that's it." It will convey, with much talking, a Mr. Dillett's spacious room on the first floor, looking out on the drive. The sheeting will unwound from it, and the front thrown open, and for the next hour or two Mr. Dillett will fully occupied in extracting the padding and setting in order the contents of the rooms. When this thoroughly congenial task were finished, I must say that it would have been difficult to find a more perfect and attractive specimen of a doll's house in strawberry or Gothic than that which now stood on Mr. Dillett's large knee-hole table, lighted up by that evening sun which comes slanting through 3 tall sash windows. It were quite 6 feet long, including the chapel or oratory, which flanked the front on the left as you faced it, and the stable on the right. The main block of the house was, as I have said, in the Gothic manner, that is to say, the windows had pointed arches, and was surmounted by what are called ogive-aluds, with crochets and finials such as we see on the canopies of tombs built in the church walls. At the angles was absurd turrets covered with arched panels. The chapel had been pinnacled and buttressed, and a bell in the turret and coloured glass in the windows. When the front of the house were open, you saw 4 large rooms: bedroom, dining room, drawing room and kitchen, each with its appropriate furniture in very complete state. The stable on the right were in 2 stories, with its proper complement of horses, coaches and grooms, and with its clock and Gothic cupola for the clock bell. Pages, of course, might be written on the outfit of the mansion. How many frying pans, how many gilt chairs, what pictures, carpets, chandeliers, 4 posters, table linen, glass, crockery and plate it possessed. But all this must be left to the imagination. I will only say that for the place or plinth on which the house stood, for it fitted with one of some depth which allowed of a flight of steps to the front door and a terrace partly balustraded, contained a shallow drawer or drawers in which were neatly stored sets of embroidered curtains, changes of raiment for the inmates, and, in short, all the material for an infinite series of variation and refitting of the most absorbing and delightful kind. Quintessence of Horace Walpole, that's what it is. He must have had something to do with the making of it. Such was Mr. Dillett's murmured reflection as he knelt before it in reverent ecstasy. Simply wonderful. This is my day and no mistake. £500 coming in this morning for that cabinet which I never cared about, and now this tumbling into my hands for 1/10, at the very most, of what it would fetch in town. Well, well, it almost makes one afraid something will happen to counter it. Let's have a look at the population, anyhow. Accordingly, he set them out before him in a row. Again, here is an opportunity which some would snatch of at making an inventory of costumes. I am incapable of it. There were a gentleman and a lady, in blue satin and brocade respectively. There was 2 children, a boy and a girl. There were a cook, a nurse, a footman, and there were the stable servants, 2 postilions, a coachman, 2 grooms. Anyone else? Yes, possibly. The curtains of the 4-poster in the bedroom were closely drawn round all 4 sides of it, and he put his finger in between them and felt in the bed. He drew the finger back hastily, for it almost seemed to him as something had, not stirred perhaps, but yielded, in an odd larve way as he pressed it. Then he put back the curtain, for which ran on rods in the proper manner, and extended from the bed a white-haired old gentleman in a long linen nightdress and cap, and laid him down by the rest. The tale complete. Dinner time was now near, so Mr. Diller spent but 5 minutes in putting the lady and children into the drawing room, the gentleman into the dining room, the servants into the kitchen and stables, and the old man back into his bed. He retired into his dressing room next door, and we see and hear no more of him until something like 11 o'clock at night. His whim was to sleep surrounded by some of the gems of his collection. The big room in which we have seen him contained his bed, bath, wardrobe, and all the appliances of dressing were in a commodious room adjoining. But his four-poster, which itself were a valued treasure, stood in the large room where he sometimes wrote and often sat, and even received visitors. Tonight he repaired to it in a highly complacent frame of mind. There were no striking clock within earshot, none on the staircase, none in the stable, none in the distant church tower. Yet it is indisputable that Mr. Dillett was startled out of a very pleasant slumber by a bell tolling. 1. He was so much startled that he did not merely lie breathless, with wide open eyes, but actually sat up in his bed. He never asked himself, to the morning hours, how it were that, though there were no lights at all in the room, a doll's house on the near old table stood out with complete clearness. But it was so. The effect was that of a bright harvest moon on shining full on the front of a big white stone mansion. A quarter of a mile away it might be, yet every detail was photographically sharp. There was trees about it too, trees rising behind the chapel and the house. He seemed to be conscious of the scent of a cool, still September night. He thought he could hear an occasional stamp and clink from the stables, as of horses stirring. With another shock, he realised that above the house he was looking, not at the wall of his room with his pictures, but at the profound blue of a night sky. There were lights, more than one, in the windows, and he quickly saw that this was no four-roomed house with a movable front, but one of many rooms and staircases. I realised, the scene as if through the wrong end of a telescope. "You mean to show me something?" he muttered to himself, and he gazed earnestly on the nighted windows. They would in real life have been shuttered or curtained, no doubt, he thought, but as it were, there was nothing to intercept his view of what was being transacted inside the rooms. 2 rooms was lighted, one on the ground floor, to the right of the door, one upstairs on the left. The first brightly enough, the other rather dimly. The lower room was the dining room. A table was laid, but the meal were over, and only wine and glasses was left on the table. The man of the blue satin and the woman of brocade were alone in the room, and they was talking very earnestly, seated close together at the table, their elbows on it. Every now and again stopping to listen, as it seemed. Once he rose, come to the window, and opened it, and put his head out and his hand to his ear. There were a lighted taper and a silver candlestick on a sideboard. When the man left the window, he seemed to leave the room also, and the lady, taper in hand, remained standing and listening. The expression on her face was that of one striving her utmost to keep down fear that threatened to master her, and succeeding. It was an hateful face too, broad, flat, and sly. Now the man come back, and she took some small thing from him and hurried out of the room. He too disappeared, but only for a moment or two. The front door slowly opened, and he stepped out and stood on the top of the perron, looking this way and that. Then he turned towards the upper window that were lighted, and shook his fist. It was time to look at that upper window. Through it was seen a 4-post bed, a nurse or other servant in an armchair, evidently sound asleep. In the bed an old man, lying, awake and, one would say, anxious, from the way in which he shifted about and moved his fingers, beating tunes on the coverlet. Beyond the bed a door opened. Light was seen on the ceiling, and the lady come in. She set down her candle on the table, come to the fireside and roused the nurse. In her hand she had an old-fashioned wine bottle, ready uncorked. The nurse took it, poured some of the contents into a little silver saucepan, added some spice and sugar from casters on the table, and set it to warm on the fire. Meanwhile the old man in the bed beckoned feebly at the lady, who come to him smiling, took his wrist as if to feel his pulse, and bit her lip as if in consternation. He looked at her anxiously, and then pointed to the window and spoke. She nodded, and did as the man below had done, opened the casement and listened, perhaps rather ostentatiously, then drew in her head and shook it, looking at the old man, who seemed to sigh. By this time the posset on the fire was steaming, and the nurse poured it out into a small 2-handed silver bowl, and brought it to the bedside. The old man seemed disinclined for it, and waving it away, but the lady and the nurse together bent over him and evidently pressed it upon him. He must have yielded, for they supported him into a sitting position and put it to his lips. He drank most of it in several draughts, so they lay him down. The lady left the room, smiling good night to him, and took the bottle and the silver saucepan with her. The nurse returned to the chair, and there were an interval of complete quiet. Suddenly the old man started up in his bed, and he must have uttered some cry, for the nurse started out of her chair and made but one step of it to the bedside. He was sad and terrible sight, flushed in the face almost to blackness, the eyes glaring whitely, both hands clutching at his heart, foam at his lips. For a moment the nurse left him, ran to the door, flung it wide open, and, once at roses, screamed aloud for help, then darted back to the bed, and seemed to try feverishly to soothe him, to lay him down, anything. As the lady, her husband, and several servants rushed into the room with horrified faces, the old man collapsed under the nurse's hands and lay back, and the features, contorted with agony and rage, relaxed slowly into calm. Gonna pause here for a breath to take a drink. A few moments later, lights showed out of the left of the house, and a coach with flambeaux drove up to the door. A white-wigged man in black got nimbly out and ran up the steps, carrying a small leather trunk-shaped box. You were met in the doorway by the man and his wife, she with her handkerchief clutched between her hands, he with a tragic face, but retaining his self-control. They led the newcomer into the dining room, where he set his box of papers on the table and, turning to them, listened with a face of consternation at what they had to tell. He nodded his head again and again, threw out his hand slightly, declined, it seemed, offers of refreshment and lodging for the night, and within a few minutes come slowly down the steps, entering the coach and driving off the way he had come. As the man in blue watched him from the top of the steps, a smile, not pleasant to see, stole slowly over his fat white face. Darkness fell over the whole scene as the lights of the coach disappeared. But Mr. Dillett remained, sitting up in the bed. He had rightly guessed that there would be a sequel. The house front glimmered out again before long, but now there were a difference. The lights are in other windows, one at the top of the house, the other illuminating the range of coloured windows of the chapel. How he saw through these is not quite obvious, but he did. The interior were as carefully furnished as the rest of the establishment, with its miniature red cushions on the desks, its Gothic stall canopies, and its western gallery and pinnacled organ with gold parts. On the centre of the black and white pavements were a bier. 4 tall candles burned at the corners. On the bier were a coffin, covered with a pall of black velvet. As he looked, the folds of the pall stirred. It seemed to rise at one end, it slid downwards. It fell away, exposing the black coffin with its silver handles and nameplate. One of the tall candlesticks swayed and toppled over. I asked no more, but turned, as Mr. Dillett hastily did, and looking at the lighted window at the top of the house, where a boy and a girl lay, 2 truckle beds and a 4-poster for the nurse rose above them. The nurse were not visible for the moment, but the father and mother were there, dressed now in mourning, but with very little sign of mourning in their demeanour. Indeed, there was laughing and talking with a good deal of animation, sometimes to each other, and sometimes trying to remark to one or other of the children, and again laughing at the answers. Then the father was seen to go on tiptoe out of the room, taking with him as he went a white garment that hung on a peg near the door. He shut the door after him. A minute or two later it was slowly opened again, and a muffled head poked round it. A bent form of sinister shape stepped across to the truckle beds, and suddenly stopped, threw up its arms, and revealed, of course, the father, laughing. The children was in agonies of terror, the boy with the bedclothes over his head, the girl throwing herself out of the bed into her mother's arms. Attempts at consolation followed. The parents took the children on their laps, patted them, picked up the white gown and showed there were no harm in it, and so forth, and at last, putting the children back in the bed, left the room with encouraging waves of the hand. As they left it, the nurse come in, and soon the light died down. Still, Mr. Dillett watched immovable. A new sort of light, Not a lamp or candle. A pale, ugly light began to dawn around the door case at the back of the room. The door opening again. The seer does not like to dwell upon what he saw enter in the room. He says it might be described as a frog the size of a man, but it had scanty white hair about its head. It was busy about the truckle beds, but not for long. The sound of cries, faint as if coming out of a vast distance, but even so, infinitely appalling, reached the ear. There were signs of hideous commotion all over the house. Lights moved along and up and down, and doors opened and shut, and running figures passed within the windows. The clock in the stable turret tolled one, and darkness fell again. It were only dispelled once more, to show the house front. At the bottom of the steps, dark figures was drawn up in 2 lines, holding flaming torches. More dark figures come down the steps, bearing first one, then another small coffin, and the lines of torch-bearers, with a coffin between them, moved silently onward to the left. The hours of night passed on, now so slowly, Mr. Dillett thought. Gradually he sunk down from sitting in the line in his bed, but he did not close an eye, and early next morning he sent for the doctor. I'm going to pause now because we're about to enter into the ad break, so I shall come back once those are over. In the meantime, we'll do a little bit of discussion, shall we? So, answers on. How much more of the story is there? There's only about 5 more pages after this, so I don't know it's worth doing a whole lot of discussion of the actual story we're currently on. So let's do a little bit of general discussion on the nature of M.R. James while we wait and have these ads play. And I'll have a quick drink before we do. Seems very dry tonight, Lord. Right. So M.R. James, I've read a lot of him, as I've said, and I still don't know what to make of him, really. I mean, again, I do really enjoy his stories. I think he does a really good job of telling good, unnerving ghost stories. Not ones that are super. You know, not scary. They're not terrifying in the modern fashion. Sometimes they're not all constant horror, but they do a really good job of being unnerving in small moments and building well to those moments, and then even leaving from them. And they also do a really good job of, how'd you say? They do a really good job of feeling realistic. I've said many times, I don't know whether these is all fiction or if these is just accounts he's collected. Because they feel like, I mean, not only do they feel like genuine ghost stories, like, you know, the accounts of small haunted things and little phenomena, but the ways in which they're handled is often very realistic. And some of the framing is, even when it's not particularly good for the narrative, very sort of true to life. Like that first one we did of his, which you can't see here, but I'll slip down like a midget. Yeah, there we are. Martin's Close, which that one was written as an account of like the court transcripts of I think a 15th, 16th century court case of a murder, you know? And it felt very true to life. And a lot of his stories do. The people who are in them act in rational, realistic ways. They act, you know, not to investigate and learn all the details, but to resolve the issue. They get rid of the cursed thing, or they throw it out, or they do whatever little thing will solve the thing. And if you learn all the details of it, more the good, but a lot of the time you don't. You just get enough to have a glimpse, sort of an idea of how things have worked, and then they're on with you. And I find them very compelling. A lot of them aren't even that particularly serious or notable cursed objects. Like there was one that was just I forget what it was. It was a very specific type of old-fashioned carving, but it was just a picture that showed the kidnapping of a child happening over the course of a night, and it would just slowly change with time to show us at different stages of it. They're good in a really sort of compelling, low-key way. And then you occasionally have moments like in The Pointer's Diary yesterday, where there's just a moment of really terrifying, like good prose that grips you. And yeah, I still can't make up my mind whether these is fictional or if they's real. Or just accounts. And like I say, Lamp won't tell me, so we're stuck with it. But yeah, ad break should be over now, so we'll get back into it. Anyone who wasn't at, we just talked about M.R. James the writer, so you didn't miss any of the story. Now, well. Yes. And early next morning he sent for the doctor. The doctor found him in a disquieting state of nerves and recommended sea air. To a quiet place on the east coast he accordingly repaired by easy stages in his car. One of the first people he met on the seafront were Mr. Chittenden, who, it appeared, had likewise been advised to take his wife away for a bit of a change. Mr. Chittenden looked somewhat askance upon him when they met, and not without cause. "Well, I don't wonder at you being a bit upset, Mr. Diller." "What?" "Yes, well, I might say horrible upset, to be sure, seeing what me and my poor wife went through ourselves. But I'll put it to you, Mr. Diller, one of two things. Was I going to scrap a lovely piece like that on the one hand, or were I going to tell customers I'm selling you a regular picture place drama in real life of olden time, built to perform regular at 1 o'clock a.m.? What would you have said yourself? And next thing you know, 2 justices of the peace in the back parlour, and poor Mr. and Mrs. Chittenden off in a spring cart to the country asylum, and everyone in the street saying, 'Ah, I thought I had come there. Look at the way the man drank.' And me next door but one were total abstainer, as you know. That was my position. What? Me have it back in the shop? Well, what do you think? No, but I tell you what I'll do. You shall have your money back, but buy the £10 I paid for it, and you make what you can." Later in the day, in what is offensively called the smoke room of the hotel, a murmured conversation between the two went on for some time. "How much do you really know about the thing and where it came from?" "Honest, Mr. Diller, I don't know the house. Of course it come out of a lumber room of a country house, that anyone could guess. But I'll go so far as to say this. I believe it's not 100 miles from the place. Which direction and how far I've no notion. I'm only judging by guesswork. The man I actually played the cheque to ain't one of my regular men, and I've lost sight of him. But I have the idea that this part of the country was his best, and that's every word I could tell you. But now, Mr. Diller, there's one thing that rather physics me. That old chap, I suppose you tore him drive up to the door. I thought so. Now, would he have been the medicine man, do you take it? My wife would have it so, but I stuck with that with a lawyer, because he had papers with him, and the one he took out was followed up." "I agree," said Mr. Diller. "Thinking it over, I came to that conclusion that was the old man's will, ready to be signed." "Just what I thought," said Mr. Chittenden. "And I took it that will would have cut out the young people, eh? Well, it's been a lesson to me, I know that. I shan't buy no more dolls' houses, not waste no more money on the pictures. And as to this business of poisoning Grandpa, well, if I know myself, I never had much of a turn for that. Live and let live, that's been my motto throughout my life, and I ain't found it a bad one." Fitted with these elevated sentiments, Mr. Chittenden retired to his lodgings. Mr. Diller next day repaired to the local institute, where he hoped to find some clue to the riddle that absorbed him. He gazed in despair at a long file of Canterbury and York Society's publications and the parish registers of the district. No print resembling the house of his nightmare were among those that hung on the staircase and in the passages. Disconsolate, he found himself at last in a direct room, staring at a dusty model of a church in a dusty glass case. Model of St. Stephen's Church, Coxon, presented by J. Moore Esquire of Ilbridge House, 1877. The work of his ancestor, James Merriweather, died 1786. There was something in the fashion of it that reminded him dimly of his horror. He retraced his steps to a wall map he had noticed, and made out that Ilbridge House were in Coxon parish. Coxon were, as it happened, one of the parishes of which he had retained the name when he glanced over the file of printed registers, and it was not long before he found them in the record of the burial of Roger Milford, aged 76, on the 11th of September 1757, and of Roger and Elizabeth Merriweather, aged 9 and 7, on the 19th of the same month. It seemed worthwhile to follow up this clue, frail as it were, and in the afternoon he drove out to Coxon. The east end of the north aisle of the church is a Milford chapel. On its north wall are tablets to the same persons. Roger, the elder it seems, were distinguished by all the qualities which adorn the father, the magistrate, and the man. The memorial were erected by his attached daughter Elizabeth, who did not long survive the loss of a parent, ever solicitous for her welfare, and of 2 amiable children. The last sentence were plainly an addition to the original inscription. A yet later slab told of James Merriweather, husband of Elizabeth, who, in the dawn of life, practised not without success those arts which had he continued their exercise, might, in the opinion of the most competent judges, have earned for him the name of the British Vitruvius, who were overwhelmed by the visitation which deprived him of an affectionate partner and a blooming offspring, past his prime and age in a secluded yet elegant retirement. His grateful nephew and heir indulges a pious sorrow by the too brief recital of his excellencies. The children were more simply commemorated. Both died on the night of the 12th of September. Mr. Dillett felt sure that in Ilbridge House he had found the scene of his drama. In some old sketchbook, possibly in some old print, he may yet find convincing evidence that he is right. But the Ilbridge House of today is not what he saw. It is an Elizabethan erection of the 40s, in red brick with the stone coins and dressings. A quarter of a mile from it, in a low part of the park, backed by ancient stag-horned, ivy-strangled trees and thick undergrowth, are marks of a terrace platform, overgrown with rough grass. A few stone balusters lie here and there, and an heap or two, covered with nettles and ivy, of wrought stones with badly carved crockets. This, someone told Mr. Dillett, was the site of an older house. As he drove out of the village, the hall clock struck 4, and Mr. Dillett stared up and clasped his hands to his ears. It was not the first time he had held that bell. Awaiting an offer from the other side of the Atlantic, the doll's house still reposes, carefully sheeted, in a loft over Mr. Dillett's stables, with a Collins conveyed it on the day when Mr. Dillett started for the sea coast. And there's a little note here afterwards, in brackets. It will be said, perhaps, and not unjustly, that this is no more than a variation on a former story of mine called the Mezzotint. I can only hope that there is enough of variation in the setting to make the repetitions of the motif tolerable. Well, I was just talking about the Mezzotint. The Mezzotint was the story I mentioned in the break, which is to do with the haunted portrait, which I've read before. Which, yeah, I guess that's that little note there is sort of strong evidence that actually these is fictional, because if these was accounts, I don't suppose you'd be apologising for making a. I wouldn't have said they was the same story, but I guess there is something the same about them. Just a haunted object that plays out a terrible event that happened. But yeah, let's do a little bit of analysis then of the of the Haunted Dollhouse. But first, I'll have a quick drink of water because I've got to remember to do that. It's important. So first things first. I like the fact that you have a character who is just who previously had this house, knew it was haunted, and then just decided to sell it anyway. Well, yeah, he paid £10 for it. He's not going to make a loss on the thing. Just sells it off. That's quite funny. And the idea that the answer to the problem is to sell it off across the sea to America is also quite funny to me. Oh yeah, well, I'm not taking a loss on it. You take a loss on it. I also will say that the voice of what was his name? Not Dillett. The voice of Chittenden, the way he's written, does make me think very heavily of like a Cockney geezer with an accent similar to my own. So I pitched my voice up a bit for him and maybe exaggerated things a bit. But yeah, I do appreciate him. It is a sentiment that I personally approve of. If I was to buy a haunted object for quite a lot of money, I'd probably try and sell it on rather than just getting rid of it, if I'm honest. It feels like, I mean, you're not going to make a loss on it. You're just not. You've already suffered the horrors. Why would you suffer the horror of a financial loss as well? Yeah. Other than that, I think there's something quite compelling about the idea of a haunted object like this. Dollhouses in themselves are quite evocative objects. You know, the idea of an old living situation recreated in miniature. It's basically a diorama of a living thing of a space, and if it's modelled after a real house. The idea that if an horrible thing was to happen in that house, that might imprint itself upon a smaller version, seems logical to me, Sort of like the principle behind a voodoo doll, right? The small thing is the big thing. But if the stuff that happens in the small thing can happen in the big thing, why couldn't the stuff that happens in the big thing happen in the small thing? And being that the small thing is much smaller, why wouldn't that have more of an impact on the small thing, It makes a sort of sense to me in the way of an haunting. Though I can't suppose I'll say that I necessarily understand the logic behind them. But yeah. And the idea of just this event playing out over and over again, this sort of two-part horror story, the poisoning of an old man and then that old man coming back to warn, it's compelling. The way it comes after the children, I don't understand. Just seems a little bit needlessly cruel in my mind. Yeah, other than that, a compelling enough little story. I enjoyed it. That having been said, I don't think I've got too much else to say about it. Also, actually, the idea of like the description of something as a pallid man-sized frog but hairy, that's quite a grim description, isn't it? Not a bad one there. Take a moment to note that. But other than that, I think not much else to say, so I'll have another quick swig of water and then we'll press on. Right then. This next one looks like it might be a bit longer than the others we've done. We'll just double check. The Uncommon Prayer Book. A little bit, but not much actually. I was going to say if it's much longer, we'll probably call that the last one, but it's a little bit long, but not so much longer. So what we'll do is we'll get through it and then we'll see how we're feeling. And then maybe if we feel like we'll do one more, and if we're not, we won't. How long's the one afterwards? Actually, let's check that while we've got the moment. After the Uncommon, the Neighbour's Landmark. That's about the same length. So yeah, we'll do the Haunted Dollhouse and then we'll see how we feel. Hey chat. But yeah, for now though, the Haunted Dollhouse. No, that's not. We've just done the door. No, we'll do the Book of the Uncommon Prayer Book, and then we'll see how we feel. Lord, losing myself here, Lord. The Uncommon Prayer Book. 1. Mr. Davison was spending the first week in January alone in a country town. A combination of circumstances had driven him into that drastic course. His nearest relations were enjoying winter sports abroad, and the friends who had been kindly anxious to replace them had an infectious complaint in the house. Doubtless he might have found someone else to take pity on him, but, he reflected, most of them have made up their parties, and after all, it's only for 3 or 4 days at most that I have to fend for myself, and it will be just as well if I can get a move on with my introduction to the Leaventhorpe papers. I might use the time by going down as near as I can to Goldsford and making acquaintance with the neighbourhood. I want to see the remains of Leaventhorpe House and the tombs in the church. The first day after his arrival at the Swan Hotel at Longbridge was so stormy that he got no further than the tobacconists. The next, comparatively bright, he used for his visit to Goldsford, which interested him more than a little, but had no ulterior consequences. The third, which were really a pearl of a day for early January, were too fine to be spent indoors. He gathered from the landlord that a favourite practice of visitors in the summer were to take a morning train or a couple of stations westward and walk back down the valley of the Thames, through Sandford St Thomas and Stanford Magdalen, both of which were accounted highly picturesque villages. He closed with this plan, and we now find them seated in a third-class carriage at 9:45 AM on his way to Kingsburn Junction, and studying the map of the district. One old man was his only fellow traveller, a piping old man who seemed inclined for conversation. So Mr. Davidson, after going through the necessary versicles and responses about the weather, inquired whether he were going far. "No, sir, not far enough this morning, sir," said the old man. "I ain't only going so far as what they call Kingsburn Junction. In but 2 stations betwixt here and there. Yes, they call it Kingsburn Junction." "I'm going there too," said Mr. Davidson. "Ah, indeed, sir. You know that part." "No, I'm only going for the sake of taking a walk back to Longbridge and seeing a bit of the country." "Oh, indeed, sir. Well, it's a beautiful day for a gentleman as enjoys a bit of a walk." "Yes, to be sure. Have you got far to go when you go to Kingsbourne?" No, sir, I ain't got far to go once I get to Kingsburn Junction. I'm going to see my daughter, sir. She lives at Broxton. It's about 2 miles across the fields from what they call Kingsburn Junction, that is. You have that marked down in your map, I expect, sir?" "I expect I have. Let me see here. Broxton, did you say?" "Here's Kingsburn, yes. And which day is Broxton? Towards the Sandfords?" "I said. Broxton Court and a park. I didn't see the village, though." "Ah, no, sir, you wouldn't see no village of Broxton. There ain't only the court and the chapel at Broxton." "Chapel? Oh, yes, that's marked here, too. The chapel close by the court, it seems to be. Does it belong to the court?" "Ah, yes, sir, that's so close to the court. Only a step. Yes, that belongs to the court. My daughter, you see, sir, she's the keeper's wife now, and she lives at the cart and looks after things now the family's away. No one living there now, then? No, sir, not for a number of years. The old gentleman, he lived there when I were a lad, and the lady, she lived on after him to be very near upon 90 years of age. And then she died, and then, them that have it now, they've got this other place, in Warwickshire, I believe it is. And they don't do nothing about letting the court out. But Colonel Wildman, he have the shooting, and young Mr. Clark, he's the agent. He come over once in so many weeks to see the things, and my daughter's husband, he's the keeper. And who uses the chapel? Just the cheap people around about, I suppose. Oh, no one doesn't use the chapel. There ain't no one to go. All the people about, they go to Stanford St. Thomas Church. My son-in-law, he goes to Kingsman Church now, because the gentleman at Stanford, he'd have this Gregory singing, and my son-in-law, he don't like that. He says he can hear the old donkey braying any day of the week, and he likes something a little cheerful on the Sunday. The old man drew his hand across his mouth and laughed. That's what my old son-in-law say. He say he can hear the old donkey, etc. Da capo. Mr. Davison also laughed as honestly as he could, thinking meanwhile that Broxton Court and Chapel would probably be worth including in his walk. For the map showed that from Broxton he could strike the Thames Valley quite as easily as by following the main Kingsbourne Longbridge Road. So when the mirth excited by remembrance of the son-in-law's bon mot had died down, he returned to the charge and ascertained that both the court and the chapel were of the class known as old-fashioned places, and that the old man would be very willing to take him thither, and his daughter would be happy to show him whatever she could. That ain't a lot, sir, not as the family were living there. The looking-glass corridor, and the paintings and the curtains and carpets followed away. Not but I dare say she could show you a pair just to look at, if she can go over them to see as the moss shouldn't get in them. I shan't mind that, thank you. If she can show me the inside of the chapel, that's what I'd like best to see. She can show you that right enough, sir. She have the key of the door, you see, and most weeks she go in and dust about. It's a nice chapel, laddies. My son-in-law, he says he'll be bound they didn't have none of this Gregory singing there. Dear, I can't help but smile when I think of him saying that about the old donkey. I can hear him pray, say, any day of the week, and so I can, sir. That's true, anyway. The walk across the fields from Kingsbourne to Broxton were very pleasant. It lay the most part on top of the country, and commanded wide views over a succession of ridges, plough and pasture, or covered with dark blue woods, all ended more or less abruptly on the Rah, in headlands that overlooked the wide valley of a great western river. The last field they crossed were bounded by a close copse, and no sooner was they in it than the path turned downward very sharply, and it became evident that Broxton were neatly fitted into a sudden and very narrow valley. It was not long before they had glimpses of groups of smokeless stone chimneys and stone tiled roofs close beneath their feet, and not many minutes after that they was wiping their shoes at the back door of Broxton Court, while the keeper's dogs barked very loudly in unseen places, and Mrs. Porter, in quick succession, screamed at them to be quiet, greeted her father, and begged both of her visitors to step in. I'll pause here because it's breaking the text to have another swallow of water. So, it was not to be expected that Mr. Davidson should escape being taken through the principal rooms of the court, in spite of the fact that the house were entirely out of commission. Pictures, carpets, curtains, furniture were all covered up or put away, as old Mr. Avery had said. And the admiration which our friend were very ready to bestow had to be lavished on the proportions of the rooms, and on the one painted ceiling upon which an artist, who had fled from London in the plague year, had depicted the triumph of loyalty and defeat of sedition. In this, Mr. Davidson can show an unfeigned interest. The portraits of Cromwell, Urton, Bradshaw, Peters, and the rest, rather in carefully devised torments, was evidently the part of the design on which most planes had been devoted. That poor old Lady Sadler had the painting done, same as the one what put up the chapel. They say she was the first that went up to London to dance on Oliver Cromwell's grave. So said Mr. Avery, and continued musingly. Well, I suppose she got some satisfaction to her mind, but I don't know if she should want to pay the fare to London and back just for that. And my son-in-law, he say the same. He say he don't know as he should have cared to pay all that money for only her that. They were telling the gentleman as we come along the train, Mary, what your Harry says about this Gregory singing down in Stafford here. We had a bit of a laugh over that, sir, didn't us? Yes, to be sure we did. Ha ha! Once again, Mr. Davidson strove to do justice to the pleasantry of the keeper. But, he said, if Miss Porter can show me the chapel, I think I should It should be now, for the days aren't long, and I want to get back to Longbridge before it falls quite dark. Even if Broxdown Court had not been illustrated in rural life, and I think it has not, I do not propose to point out its excellences here. But the chapel, a word must be said. It stands about 100 yards from the Ass, and has its own little graveyard and trees about it. It is a stone building about 70 feet long, and in the Gothic style, as a style understood in the middle of the 17th century. On the whole, it resembles some of the Oxford College chapels as much as anything, save that it has a distinct channel like a parish church, and a fanciful domed bell turret at the southwest angle. When the west door were thrown open, Mr. Davison could not repress an exclamation of pleased surprise at the completeness and richness of the interior. Screenwork, pulpit, seating and glass, all was of the same period, and as he advanced into the nave and sighted the organ case with its gold embossed pipes in the western gallery, his cup of satisfaction was filled. The glass in the nave windows were chiefly armorial, and in the chancel were figure subjects of the kind that may be seen at Abbey Door of Lord Scuddamore's work. This is not an archaeological review. While Mr. Davidson was still busy examining the remains of the organ, attributed to one of the Dallams, I believe, old Mr. Avery had stomped up into the chancel and were lifting the dust cloths from the blue velvet cushions of the stool desks. Evidently it were here that the family sat. Mr. Davidson heard him say in a rather rough tone of surprise, "Why, Mary, here's all the books open again." The reply were in a voice that sounded peevish rather than surprised. "Well, there, I never." Mrs. Porter went over to where her father was standing, and they continued talking in a lower key. Mr. Davidson saw plainly that something not quite in the common run were under discussion, so he come down the gallery stairs and joined them. There were no sign of disorder in the chancel, any more than the rest of the chapel, which were beautifully clean, but the 8 folio prayer books on the cushion of the stool desks were indubitably open. Mrs. Porter inclined the throat over it. "Whoever can be as does it," she says. "There's no key but mine, nor yet door but one. We come in by, and the windows is barred, every one of them. I don't like it, father, I don't." "What is it, Mrs. Porter? Anything wrong?" said Mr. Davidson. "Ah, no, sir, nothing really wrong, only the books. Every time, pretty near, that I come up to the place, I shuts them and spreads the cloths over them to keep off the dust. Ever since Mr. Clark spoke to me about it when I first come. Yet there they are again, and always the same page, and as I says, whoever it is can be as does it with the door and windows shut. And as I says, it makes anyone feel queer coming in here alone, as I have to do. Not as I'm given that way myself, not to be frightened easy, I mean to say. There's not a rat in the place, not as no rat would trouble to do a thing like that, do you think, sir?" "Hardly, I should say. It sounds very queer. They always open at the same place, did you say?" "Always the same place, sir. One of the Psalms it is. I didn't particular notice of it the first time or two, till I see a little red line of printing, and it's always caught my eye since." Mr. Davison walked along through the stalls and looked at the open books. Sure enough, they all stood at the same page. Psalm 109. At the end of it, just between the number and the Deus Laudum, were a rubric for the 25th day of April. Without pretending a minute knowledge of the history of the Book of Common Prayer, he knew enough to be sure that this were a very odd and wholly unauthorized addition to its text. And though he remembered that April 25th was St. Mark's Day, he could not imagine what appropriateness this very savage psalm could have to that festival. With slight misgivings, he ventured to turn over the leaves to examine the title page, and, knowing the need for particular accuracy in these matters, he devoted some 10 minutes to make an alarm-for-line transcription of it. The date was 1653. The printer called himself Anthony Cabman. He turned the list of proper psalms for certain days. Yes, added to it with that same inexplicable entry. For the 25th day of April, the 109th psalm. An expert would no doubt have thought of many other points to inquire into. This antiquary, as I have said, were no expert. He took stock, however, of the binding, and handsome one, a tall blue leather, bearing the arms that figured in several of the nave windows in various combinations. "How long," he said to Mrs. Porter, "have thee found these books lying open like that?" "Really, I couldn't say," said, "but it's a great many times now. Do you recollect, father, me telling you about it the first time I noticed it?" "That I do, my dear. It's in rare taking. I don't much wonder of it. It were 5 year ago. I were paying you a visit in Michaelmas time, when you come in at tea time, and he says, "Father, there's the books lying open under the class again." I didn't know what my daughter was speaking about, you see, sir. And I says, "Books," just like that, I says. And then it all come out. But as Harry says, "That's my son-in-law, sir. Wherever it can be," he says. "We keep the key locked up," he says. "And the windows is barred, every one of them. Well," he says, "I lay once I could catch 'em, and they wouldn't do us it a second time," he says. "And no more they wouldn't, I do believe it, sir. Well, that were 5 years ago, and it's been happening constant ever since, by your account, my dear. Young Mr. Clark, he don't seem to think much to it. But then he don't live here, you see. 'Tisn't his business to come clean up here in the dark of an afternoon, is it?" "I suppose you never notice anything else odd when you're at work here, Mrs. Porter?" said Mr. Davidson. "No, sir, I do not," said Mrs. Porter. "It's a funny thing to me, sir, I don't, with the feeling I have as there's something sitting here. No, it's on the other side, just within the screen, and looking at me all the time I'm dusting in the gallery and pews. I've never yet seen nothing worse than myself, as the saying goes, and I kindly hope I ne'er may." And there's another break in the text there, so I'll have another quick drink. Three. In the conversation that followed, there were not much of it. Nothing were added to the statement of the case. Having parted on good terms with Mr. Avery and his daughter, Mr. Davison addressed himself to his 8-mile walk. The little valley of Broxton soon led him down into the broader one of the Thames, and on to the Stamford St. Thomas, where he found refreshment. We need not accompany him all the way to Longbridge, but as he was changing his socks before dinner, he suddenly paused and said, half aloud, "By Jove, that is a rum thing." It had not occurred to him before how strange it were that any edition of the prayer book should have been issued in 1653, 7 years before the Restoration and 5 years before Cromwell's death, when the use of the book, let alone the printing of it, were penal. He must have been a bold man who put his name and a date on that title page. Only, Mr. Davidson reflected, it probably were not his name at all, for the ways of printers at difficult times was devious. As we were in the front hall of the Swan that evening, making some investigations about trains, a small motor stopped in front of the door, and out of it came a small man in a fur coat, who stood on the steps and gave directions in a rather yapping foreign accent to his chauffeur. When he came into the hotel, he was seen to be a black-haired and pale-faced, with a little pointed beard and gold pince-nez, altogether very neatly turned out. He went to his room, and Mr. Davidson saw no more of him until dinner time. As they was the only two dining that night, it was not difficult for the newcomer to find an excuse for falling into talk. You were evidently wishing to make out what brought Mr. Davidson into that neighbourhood of that season. "Can you tell me how far it is from here to Arlingworth?" was one of his early questions, and one which threw some light on his own plans, for Mr. Davidson recollected having seen at the station an advertisement of a sale at Arlingworth Hall, comprising old furniture, pictures and books. This then were a London dealer. "No," he said, "I have never been there. I believe it lies out by Kingsburn. It can't be less than 12 miles. I see there's a sale there shortly." The other looked at him inquisitively, and he laughed. "No," he said as if answering a question. "You needn't be afraid of my competing. I am leaving this place tomorrow." This cleared the air, and the dealer, whose name... Oh, no, sorry. I've misunderstood that, 1 second. The other looked at him inquisitively, and he laughed. "No," he said as if answering a question. "You needn't be afraid of my competing. I am leaving this place tomorrow." This cleared the air, and the dealer, whose name was Holmberger, admitted that he were in interest in books, and thought there might be in these old country house libraries something to repay a journey. "Thought," he said, "we English have always had this marvellous talent for accumulating rarities in the most unexpected places, ain't it?" And in the course of the evening he were most interesting on the subject of finds made by himself and others. "I shall take the occasion, after this sale, to look around the district a bit. Perhaps you could inform me of some likely spots, Mr. Davison." Mr. Davison, though he had seen some very tempting locked-up bookcases at Broxton Court, kept his counsel. He did not really like Mr. Holmberger. Next day, as he sat in the train, a little ray of light came to illuminate one of yesterday's puzzles. He happened to take out an almanac diary that he had bought for the new year, and it occurred to him to look at the remarkable events for April 25th. There was St. Mark, Oliver Cromwell, born 1599. That, coupled with the painted ceiling, seemed to explain a good deal. The figure of old Lady Sadleir became more substantial to his imaginations, as a one whose love for the church and king had gradually given place to intense hate for the power that had silenced the one and slaughtered the other. What curious evil service was that which she and a few like her had been wont to celebrate year by year in that remote valley? And how in the world had she managed to elude authority? And again, did not this persistent opening of the books agree oddly with other traits of her portrait known to him? It would be interesting for anyone who chanced to be near Broxton on the 25th of April to look in at the chapel and see if anything exceptional happened. When he came to think of it, there seemed to be no reason why he should not be that person himself. He, and if possible some congenial friends, he resolved that it should be so. Knowing that he really knew nothing about the printing of prayer books, he realised that he might make it his business to get the best light on the matter without divulging his reasons. I may say at once that his search were entirely fruitless. One writer, of the early part of the 19th century, a writer that rather windy and rhapsodical chat about One writer of the early part of the 19th century, a writer of rather windy and rhapsodical chat about books, professed to have heard of a special anti-Cromwellian issue of the prayer book in the very midst of the Commonwealth period, but he did not claim to have seen a copy, and no one had believed him. Looking into the matter, Mr. Davidson found that the statement were based on letters from a correspondent who had lived near Longbridge, so we were inclined to think that the Broxton prayer books were at the bottom of it, and excited a momentary interest. Months went on, and St. Mark's Day come nearer. Nothing interfered with Mr. Davidson's plans of visiting Broxton, or those of the friends whom he had persuaded to go with him, and to whom alone he confided the puzzle. The same 9:45 train which had taken him in January took him now to Kingsburn. The same field path led them to Broxton, but today they stopped more than once to pick a cowslip. The distant woods and ploughed uplands were of another colour, and in the copse there were, as Mrs. Porter had said, a regular charm of birds, where you couldn't hardly collect your mind sometimes with it. She recognised Mr. Davidson at once, and was very ready to do the honours of the chapel. The new visitor, Mr. Whittam, was as much struck by the completeness of it as Mr. Davidson had been. "There can't be another such in England," he said. "Books open again, Mrs. Porter," said Davidson, as they walked up to the chancel. "Dear, yes, I expect so, sir," said Mrs. Porter as she drew off the cloths. "Well, there," she exclaimed the next moment, "if they ain't shut. It's the first time I ever found them so. But it's not for want of care on my part, I do assure you, gentlemen. If they weren't, I filled the cloth the last thing before I shut up last week, when the gentlemen had done photographing the east window, and every one of them was shut. When there were ribbons left, I tied them. Now I think of it, I don't remember even to have done that before, and perhaps whoever it is only just made a difference to him. Well, it only shows, don't it? At first you don't succeed. Try again." Meanwhile, the two men had been examining the books, and now Davidson spoke. "I'm sorry to say I'm afraid there's something wrong here, Mrs. Porter. These are not the same books." It would make too long a business to detail all Mrs. Porter's outcries and the questionings that followed. The upshot was this. Early in January, the gentleman had come to see over the chapel, and thought a great deal of it, and he said he must come back in the spring weather and take some photographs. And only a week ago he had drove up in his motoring car in a very heavy box with all slides in it, and she had locked him in because he said something about a long explosion, and she were afraid of some damage happening. He says no, not explosion, but it appeared the lantern that they take the slides with weren't very slow, and so we were in there the best part of an hour, and she comes and let him out, and he drove off with his box and and gave her his visiting card, and oh dear, I think such a thing. He must have changed the books and took the old ones away with him in his box." "What sort of man was he?" "Oh dear, he were a smile-made gentleman, if you can call him so, after the way he behaved. With black hair, that is if it was hair, and gold eyeglasses if they was gold. Really, don't want to know what to behave. Sometimes I doubt he were a real Englishman at all, and yet he seemed to know the language, and had the name of his visiting card like everybody else might." "Just so. Might I see the card?" "Yes, T.W. Henderson, and addressed somewhere near Bristol." "Well, Mrs. Porter, it's quite clear that this Mr. Henderson, as he calls himself, has walked off with your 8 prayer books, and put 8 others about the same size in place of them. Now listen to me. I suppose you must tell your husband about this, but neither you nor he must say one word about it to anyone else. If you'll give me the address of the agent, Mr. Clarkson, I will write to him and tell him exactly what has happened, and that it really is no fault of yours. But you understand, we must keep it very quiet. And why? Because this man who has stolen your books will of course try to sell them one at a time, for I may tell you they are worth a good deal of money, and the only way we can bring it home to him is by keeping a sharp lookout and saying nothing." By dint of repeating the same advice in various forms, they succeeded in impressing Mrs. Porter with a real need for silence, and was forced to make a conclusion only in the case of Mr. Avery, who were expected on a visit shortly. "But you may be safe with father, sir," said Mrs. Porter. "Father ain't a talking man." It were not quite Mr. Davidson's experience of him. Still, there were no neighbours at Broxton, and even Mr. Avery must be aware that gossip with anybody on such a subject would be likely to end in the Porters having to look out for another situation. A last question was whether Mr. Henderson, so called, had anyone with him. "No, sir, not when he came, he hadn't. He were walking his own motoring car himself, and what luggage he had, let me see. There were his lantern and the box of slides inside the carriage, which I helped him into the chapel and out of it myself with, if only I'd known. When he drove away under the big yew tree by the monument, I see the long white bundle laying on top of the couch, what I didn't notice when he drove up. But he set it in front, sir, and only the boxes inside behind him. And do you really think, sir, as his name weren't Henderson at all? Oh, dear me, what a dreadful thing. I fancy what trouble it might be to bring an innocent person that might ne'er have set foot in this place but for that." They left Mrs. Porter in tears. On the way home there were much discussion as to the best means of keeping watch upon possible sales. Well, Henderson Homburger, for there could be no real doubt of the identity, had done were obviously to bring down the requisite number of folio prayer books, disguised copies from college chapels and the like, bought ostensibly for the sake of the bindings, which were superficially like enough to the old ones, and to substitute them at his leisure for the genuine articles. A week had now passed without any public notice being taken of the fact. He would take a little time himself to find out about the rarity of the books, and would ultimately, no doubt, place them cautiously. Between them, Davidson and Witham was in a position to know a good deal of what were passing in the book world, and they could map out the ground pretty completely. A weak point with them at the moment was that neither of them knew under what other names, Henderson Homburger carried on business. But there is ways of solving these problems. Yet all this planning proved unnecessary. Another break in the text, so I'll pause to take another drink. Four. We is transported to a London office on this same 25th of April. We find there, within closed doors, late in the day, two police inspectors, a commissioner, and a youthful clerk. The two latter, both, are rather pale and agitated in appearance, are sitting on chairs and being questioned. "How long do you say you've been in Mr. Pushwood's employment? 6 months? And what was his business?" "I attended sales in various parts and brought home parcels of books." "Did he keep a shop anywhere?" "No. Disposed of them right here and there, sometimes to private collectors." "Right. Now then, when did he go out last?" "Rather better than a week ago." "Tell you where he was going?" "No. Said he was going to start next day from his private residence and shouldn't be at the office. That's here, eh? For 2 days. He was to attend as usual. Where is his private residence?" "Oh, that's the address, Norwood Way. I see. Any family?" "Not in the country, huh?" "Now then, what account do you give of what's happened since he come back?" "Came back on the Tuesday, did he? And this is the Saturday. Bring any books?" "1 package. Where is it?" "In the safe. You got the key?" "No, to be sure, it's open, of course." "How did he seem when he got back? Cheerful?" "Yeah. But how do you mean, curious?" "Thought he might be in for an illness, eh? He said that, did he?" "Odd smell got in his nose and he couldn't get rid of it. Told you to let him know who wanted to see him before you let him in. That weren't usual with him." "That's the same all Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Out a good deal. Said he were going to the British Museum. Often went there to make inquiries in the way of his business. Walked up and down a lot in the office when he were in. Anyone calling those days? Mostly when he were out. Anyone find him in?" "Oh, Mr. Collinson." "And who's Mr. Collinson?" "An old customer. I know his address?" "Right, give it us afterwards." "Well now, what's about this morning?" "You left Mr. Pushwood's here at 12 and went home. Anybody see you?" "Commissioner, you did?" "Remained at home till summoned. Very well." "Oop. Rightio then, Abby. I'll have another drink. Thank you kindly." Gotta keep hydrated. 2 draw. Right, yeah. "Commissioner, you did. Remained at home till summoned here. Very well. Now, Commissioner, we have your name, Watkins, eh? Very well, make your statement. Don't go quick so we can get it down. We're on duty here, like usual. Mr. Potworth having asked me to remain on, and ordered his luncheon to be sent in, which come as ordered. I were in the lobby from 11:30 on, and see Mr. Blah, that's the clerk, leave about 12. After that, no one come in at all, except Mr. Potchwitz's luncheon, coming at 1 o'clock, and the man left at 5 minutes' time. Toward the afternoon, I become tired of waiting, and I come upstairs to this first floor. The outer door, what leads into the office, stood open, and I come up to the plate glass door here. Mr. Potwitch, he was standing behind the table smoking a cigar. He laid it down on the mantelpiece and felt in his trouser pockets, and he took out a key and went across to the safe. I knocked on the glass, thinking to see if he wanted me to come and take away his tray, but he didn't take no notice, being engaged with the safe door. Then he got it open, and he stooped down and seemed to be lifting up a package off the floor of the safe, you see. And then, sir, I see what looked to be like a great roll of old shabby white flannel, about 4 or 5 feet high. It falls forward out the inside of the safe, right against Mr. Potwich's shoulder, as he was stooping over. Mr. Potwich, he raised himself up, as it were, resting his hands on the package, and he gives an explanation. I can't hardly expect you should take what I says, but as true as I stand here, I see this roll had kind of a face in the upper end of it, sir. You can't be more surprised than what I was, I can assure you. I've seen a lot in my time. Yes, I could describe it if you wish, sir. It were very much the same as this wall here in colour. The wall had an earth-coloured distemper, and it had a bit of a band tied around underneath. And the eyes, they was dry like, much as if there was 2 big spiders' bodies in the holes. Hair? No, I don't know as much hair that would be seen. The flannel stuff over the top of the head. I'm very sure it wasn't what it should have been. No, I only see it in a flash, but I took it in like a photograph. Wish I hadn't. Yes, sir, it fell right over onto Miss Potwich's shoulder, and his face hid in his neck. Yes, sir, about where the injury was. Well, like a ferret after the rabbit and anything else. He rolled over, and of course I tried to get in at the door. As you know, sir, as it was locked on the inside, all I could do, I rang up everyone, the surgeon come, and the police, and you gentlemen, and you know about as much as what I do. If you won't be requiring me any more today, I'll be glad to be getting off home. Shut me up more than I thought, sir. Well, said one of the inspectors when they was left alone, and, well, said the other inspector after a pause. That's the surgeon's report again. You got it there? Yes. I felt in the blood like the worst kind of snake bite. Death almost instantaneous. I'm glad of that for his sake. For a nasty sight. No case for detaining this man, Watkins, anyhow. You know all about him. What about this safe now? You better go over it again, and by the way, we haven't opened that package he was busy with when he died. Well, handle it careful, said the other. There might be the snake in it for what you know. Get a light in the corners of the place too. There's room for a shortish person to stand up in, but what about ventilation? Perhaps, the other slowly, as he explored the safe with an electric torch. Perhaps they didn't require much of that. No, your word. Strikes warm coming out of that place, like a vault it is. But here, what's this bank like of dust still spread out in the room? That must have come there since the door opened, and sweep all away if you moved it, see? What do you make of that? Make of it? About as much as I make of anything else in this case. One of London's mysteries is going to be, by what I see. And I don't believe a photographer's box full of large-sized old-fashioned prayer books is just going to take much further. That's just what your package is. They're a natural but hasty utterance. The preceding narrative shows that there were, in fact, plenty of material for constructing the case, and when once Messrs. Davidson and Witham were brought up there in the Scotland Yard, the drawing up was soon made, and the circle completed. To the relief of Mrs. Porter, the owners of Broxton decided not to replace the books in the chapel. They repose, I believe, in a safe deposit in town. The police have their own methods of keeping certain matters out of the newspapers. Otherwise, it can hardly be supposed that Watkins' evidence about Mr. Poshwich's death could have failed to furnish a good many headlines of a startling character to the press. And that's the end of the Uncommon Prayer Book. That's a misleading title. There was a number of Uncommon Prayer Books there. 8 of them, in fact. Can't believe the people these days are terrible liars, all of them. Shame, shame, etc., etc. But yeah, that's an interesting one. Let's go over that one a bit, shall we? So, first things first, I do like that in this story we have a nice proper villain. You don't get them in a lot of these, a lot of the Jameses. You got a foreign chap who steals things from poor, unattended places and leaves old, poor young women in the lurch. Well, terrible. And he's dreadfully foreign. He uses fake names, and I think probably in the end is Polish, which I don't think is a stereotype for villains, but you know, it's England in the sort of turn of the century, and he's foreign, so that counts. What else? There's also quite a bit of the actual history of England in it as well. The Reformation and Oliver Cromwell, who I don't know how well he's known outside of the sort of Britain and Europe in general. But for those who aren't familiar, Oliver Cromwell was, how do you describe him? He wasn't a king exactly, but he was head of the state for a while. He led a rebellion against Charles II, and he overthrew the church. I think it would have been the Church of England by this point, not the Catholics. But yeah, and he would have been, you know, I think it would have still been the Church of England at this point. I think this is after him again, it's not super clear. But he overthrew the monarch, chopped his head off, and then he instituted Puritan doctrine. So he was much more sort of restrictive on the way that faith could be practiced, banned the Book of Common Prayer, banned Christmas Mass, banned all sorts of things. Music, football, all sorts of, like, very unpleasant man, very broadly hated. And so his birthday being celebrated with a particular reading of a vicious psalm against the enemies of God by some country nobility who disliked him makes a lot of sense. And yeah, eventually he died. I think he died of natural causes, but they reinstated the monarchy after him because he was so bloody unpopular. But yeah, that's Oliver Cromwell. No one liked him. But yeah. And then you have these prayer books, which is marked with a special prayer to be read at his downfall on the day of his birth and on a specific saint's day. And they always open themselves to this particular psalm, which, I don't know, it's interesting. Again, you sort of have this, like, these are called ghost stories, but this doesn't really strike me as being like a haunted by a particular person. I mean, there's the lady who's mentioned who went up to Danson's grave, but it's not like she's specifically doing anything, and there's 8 different books. It's more like it's a manifestation of the emotion, right? The hatred they had for this man is so strong that even years and years after his death, the book's still open to the page. Not violently, not in any particular way, but in remembrance of the hatred of him. But then when they were stolen by a man, stolen away from their proper place, from their proper owners, an avaricious man who would seek to restrict the practice of the faith, perhaps, in the way it's meant to be. Well, there you go again. All of the venom of a snake bite. There you are. That's a good word for it. Venomous. Real venom against a man. That fits. I like that. I don't know. I mean, I guess you do have a ghost as well, in the sort of spectre of cloth that bites him, and I guess was riding in his car. So maybe there is something to it. And the lady, the porter, was it porter? I think porter says she senses something watching her. So maybe there is more of a ghost to it as well, but I don't think it's like the ghost of a person. I think it is just the manifestation of these emotions, the hatred of Ollie Cromwell. There you go. I'll have another quick drink of water, but I think I will press on to one more of these because I'm still having a good time. My voice is still feeling pretty good. And I reckon we can get one more out. Call it after that, yeah? So let's press on then. The next one we got is The Neighbour's Landmark. I'm going to be sad when these are done. I have really enjoyed these, and from what I can gather from the little lamp is left draft, I think this is all of M.R. James' ghost stories, so enjoy them when we got them, yeah? There's only 6 more after this one, so A Neighbour's Landmark. Those who spend the greater part of their time in reading or writing books are, of course, apt to take rather particular notice of accumulations of books when they come across them. They will not pass a stall, a shop, or even a bedroom shelf without reading some title. And if they find themselves in an unfamiliar library, no host need trouble himself further about their entertainment. The putting of dispersed sets of volumes together, or the turning right away up of those which the dusting housemaid has left in an apoplectic condition, appeals to them as one of the lesser works of mercy. Happy in these employments, and occasionally opening an 18th century octavo to see what it's all about, and I conclude after 5 minutes that it deserves the seclusion it now enjoys, I reached the middle of a wet August afternoon at Betton Woods. You begin in a deeply Victorian manner, I said. Is this to continue? Remember, if you please, said my friend, looking at me over his spectacles, that I am a Victorian by birth and education, and that the Victorian tree may not unreasonably expect to bear Victorian fruit. Further, remember that an immense quantity of clever and thoughtful rubbish is now being written about the Victorian age. Now, he went on, laying his papers on his knee, that article, The Stricken Years in the Times Literary Supplement the other day. Able, of course it is, able. But my soul and body, do just stand over here, will you? It's on the table by you. I thought you were to read me something you had written, I said, without moving. But of course. Yes, I know, he said. Very well, then I'll do that first. But I should like to show you afterwards. What I mean, however, and he lifted the sheets of paper and adjusted his spectacles. At Betton Court, where generations back 2 country house librarians had been fused together at no descent of either stock had ever faced the task of picking them over or getting rid of duplicates. Now, I'm not getting out to tell of rarities I may have discovered, as Shakespeare quartos bound up in volumes of political tracts, or anything of that kind, but of an experience which befell me in the course of my search, an experience which I cannot either explain away or fit into the scheme of my ordinary life. It was, I said, a wet August afternoon, rather windy, rather warm. Outside the window, great trees were stirring and weeping. Between them were stretches of green and yellow country, but the court stands high on an hillside, and blue hills far off fell with rain. Up above were a very restless and hopeless movement of low clouds travelling northwest. I had suspended my work, if you call it work, for some minutes to stand at the window and look at these things, and at the greenhouse roof on the right with the water sliding off it, and at the church tower that rose behind that. It were all in favour of my going steadily on, no likelihood of clearing up for hours to come. I therefore returned to the shelves, lifted out a set of 8 or 9 volumes, lettered tracts, and conveyed them to the table for closer examination. It was, for the most part, of the reign of Anne. There were a good deal of the late peace, the late war, the conduct of the Allies. There were also letters to a convocation man, sermons preached at St. Michael's, Queeneth, inquiries into a late charge of the RT, of the Right Reverend Lord Bishop of Winchester, or more probably Winton, and to his clergy. Things all lively once, and indeed still keeping so much of their old sting that I was tempted to betake myself into an armchair in the window, and get the more time than I had intended. Besides, I was somewhat tired by the day. The church clock struck 4, and really it was 4, for in 1889 there were no saving of daylight. So I settled myself. At first I glanced over some of the war pamphlets, and pleased myself by trying to pick out Swift by his style from among the undistinguished. But the war pamphlets needed more knowledge of the geography of the Low Countries than I had. I turned to the church and read several pages of what the Dean of Canterbury said to the Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge on the occasion of their anniversary meeting in 1711. When I turned over to a letter from a beneficed clergyman of the country in the country to the Bishop of C. It's C something that's sort of sensitive. I was becoming languid, and I gazed for some moments at the following sentence without surprise. This abuse, for I think myself justified in calling it by that name, is one which I am persuaded your lordship would, if 'twere known to you, exert your utmost effort to do away. But I am also persuaded that you know no more of its existence than, in the words of the country song, that what walks in Betton Wood knows why it walks or why it cries. Then indeed I did sit up in my chair and run my finger along the lines to make sure that I had read them right. There was no mistake. Nothing more was to be gathered from the rest of the pamphlet. The next paragraph definitely changed the subject, but I have said enough upon this topic, where its opening words. So discreet too were the namelessness of the beneficed clergyman that he refrained even from initials, and had his letter printed in London. The riddle were a kind that might faintly interest anyone. To me, who have dabbled a good deal in works of folklore, it was really exciting. I was set upon solving it, finding out, what story lay behind it. And at least I felt myself lucky in one point, that whereas I might have come on the paragraph in some college library far away, here I were at Betton, on the very scene of action. The church clock struck 5, and a single stroke of a gong followed. This, I knew, meant tea. I heaved myself out of the deep chair and obeyed the summons. My host and I were alone at the court. He come in soon, went from around the landlord's errands, with a piece of local news which had to be passed on before I could make an opportunity of asking whether there were a particular place in the parish that was still known as Betton Woods. Betton Woods, he said. It was a short mile away, just on the crest of the Betton Hill, and my father stubbed up the last bits of it when it paid better to grow corn than scrub oak. Why do you want to know about Betton Woods? Because, I said, there's an old pamphlet I was reading just now, and there are 2 lines of a country song which mentions it, and they sound as if there were a story belonging to them. Someone says that someone else knows no more of whatever it may be, than that which walks in Betton Woods knows why it walks or why it cries. Goodness, said Phillipson. I wonder whether that was why. I must ask old Michael. He muttered something else to himself, and took some more tea thoughtfully. You wonder whether that was why, I said. Yes, I was going to say, whether that was why my father had the woods stubbed up. But I said just now just to get more ploughland, but I don't really know if it was. I don't believe he ever broke it up. It's a rough pasture at this moment. But there's one old chap at least who remembers something of it. Old Michael. He looked at his watch. Blessed if I don't go down there and ask him. I don't think I'll take you, he went on. He's not so likely to tell anything he thinks it's odd if there's a stranger by. Well, mind you remember every single thing he does tell. As for me, if it clears it up, I shall go out, and if it doesn't, I shall go back on with the books. And I'll stop there for a second, because we're about to enter into a break. So, how much left have we got of this book? There's a good bit left of this story, so I'll do a bit of talking about what we've read so far while the break is on. Oop. So then, the ad break is on. I'll have my quick swallow of water. This is the habit of my ad breaks. And we'll take a little bit of talking. So, first things first, I'll talk a bit about the framing because it sort of struck me, or it caught me off guard a bit. But yeah, this is seems this story is being narrated to. I was going to say it's weird actually because the person narrating it isn't talking in the first person. This is an account of someone else telling a story to the person who's recounting it to us, which is an interesting little thing. And it started sort of in medias res, like just being told as flat without any quotation marks around it. So it being spoken by someone sort of caught me off guard, which is why normally if I'm doing a character who shares my normal reading voice, it would be the character of the R character, the sort of the viewpoint character, I guess. But in this case, it's the one who's talking to him, which is probably for the best because it is the greater part of the story. But yeah, I must admit, there's a lot of like old libraries and stuff in Britain, from what I'm told, from what I remember. Yeah, lots of books are out thereabouts, lots of old things. It's an old country, is Britain, really old. Like, people talk about America being a young country, but Britain's about the opposite. Like, it's not as old as like China, but it goes back, I think, at least 5,000 years. There's a lot of history in the country. And as to the folklore, Britain is lousy with folklore. Every little place has its own little bit of folklore, and there's little legends. I mean, the fae folk and the little goblins and legendarium, and you know, there's a reason I think these might be accounts. There's so many hauntings and all sorts of things, grey ladies and things. What is it? Is that a grey man of the mountain? No, I don't really. I only half remember really, but yeah, all sorts of folklore. And this sort of little country song does sound like the sort of thing you'd catch as well. There's a lot of folk songs that are sort of only half remembered. A lot of variations too. People have made efforts to sort of track them down and account for them nowadays, but especially back in the day, prior to the sort of revival in the 70s, they were still pretty poorly documented sometimes. And even now, unique ones and unique variants do crop up all the time. And digging into the sort of folklore behind them does seem the sort of thing. Well, I must admit this one is particularly ominous sounding. I mean, what was it? And that which walks in Betton Woods knows why it walks or why it cries. That's a grim line, or a grim, I guess, couplet. But yeah, I hope we get a more complete version of that. I'm curious now. But yeah, there's an interesting little framing device, and it's quite a plausible one. Which again, pretty typical of M.R. James. But yeah, old man going for an old library finds a bit of an old song. More to follow. But we're just about the end of the ad break, so I'll have another quick swallow of water and we'll get back into things. There we are. Now back with the things. Right. Again, didn't do any of the story while the ad break was on, if you caught it. Blessed if I don't go down there and ask him. I don't think I'll take you, he went on. He's not so likely to tell anything he thinks is odd if there's a stranger by. Well, mind you remember every single thing he does tell. As for me, if it clears up, I shall go out, and if it doesn't, I shall go on with the books. It did clear up, sufficiently at least, to make me think it worthwhile to walk up the nearest hill and look over the country. I did not know the lie of the land, but the first visit I had paid to Phillipson, and this was the first day of it. So I went down the garden and through the wet shrubberies with a very open mind, and offered no resistance to the indistinct impulse, was it however so very indistinct, which kept urging me to bear to the left whenever there were a forking of the path. The result was that after 10 minutes or more, a dark going between dripping rows of box and laurel and privet, I was confronted with a stone arch in the Gothic style, set in the stone wall which encircled the old domain. The door was fastened by a spring lock, and I took the precaution of leaving this one ajar, on the jar, as I passed out on the road. That road I crossed and entered a narrow lane between edges which led upward, and that lane I pursued at a leisurely pace for as much as half a mile, and went on to the field which it led. I was now on a good point of vantage for taking in the situation, the court, the village, and the environment, and I leant upon a gate and gazed westward and downward. I think we must all know the landscape. Are they by Burkitt Forester or somewhat earlier, which, in the formal woodcuts, decorate the volumes of poetry that lay on the drawing-room tables of our fathers and grandfathers, volumes in art cloth and embossed bindings, that strike me as being the right phrase. That strikes me as being the right phrase, sorry. I confess myself an admirer of them, and especially of those which show the peasant leaning over a gate in an edge, and surveying at the bottom of a downward slope the village church spire, embosomed amid venerable trees and fertile plain, intersected by hedgerows and bounded by distant hills, beyond which the orb of the day is sinking, or it may be rising, and with level clouds illuminated by its dying or nascent ray. The expressions employed here are those which seem appropriate to the pictures I have in mind, and whether opportunity I will try to work in the vale, the grove, the cot, and the flood. Anyhow, it's beautiful to me, these landscapes, but just such a one that I would now survey. It might have come straight out of Gems, a Sacred Song, selected by a lady, and given as a birthday present to Eleanor Phillipson in 1852 by her attached friend Millicent Graves. All at once I turned as if I had been stung. There thrilled into my right ear and pierced my head a note of incredible sharpness, like the shriek of a bat, only 10 times intensified. The kind of thing that makes one wonder if something has not given way in one's brain. I held my breath and covered my ear and shivered. Something in the circulation. Another minute or two, I thought, and I returned home. But I must fix the view a little more firmly in my mind. Only, when I turned to it again, the tastes were gone out of it. The sun was down behind the hill, and the light were off the fields. When the clock bell in the church tower struck 7, I thought no longer of any kind of mellowing, evening hours of rest, and scents of flowers and woods on evening air, and of how someone on a farm a mile or two off would be saying, "How clear Betton bells sounds tonight after the rain." Instead, images come to me of dusty beams and creeping spiders, savage owls up in the tower, and forgotten graves and their ugly contents below, and a flying time and all it had taken out of my life. And just then, into my left ear, close as if the lips had been put within an inch of my head, the frightful scream come thrilling again. There was no mistake possible now. It were from outside. With no language but a cry was the thought that flashed in my mind. Hideous it were beyond anything I had heard ever since. I could read no emotion in it, and doubt if I could ever read any intelligence. All its effect would take away every vestige, every possibility of enjoyment, and make this no place to stay in one moment more. Of course, there was nothing to be seen, but I was convinced that if I waited long, the thing would pass me again on its aimless, endless beat, and I could not bear the notion of a third repetition. I hurried back the lane and down the hill. When I come to the arch and the wall, I stopped. But if I be sure of my way among those dank alleys, which would be danker and darker now? No, I confessed to myself that I was afraid. So jarred were all my nerves with the cry and the yell that I really felt I could not afford to be startled, even by a little bird in a bush or by a rabbit. I followed the road, which followed the wall. I was not sorry when I come to the gate, and the lodge, and the crowds finished and coming up towards it from the direction of the village. "And where have you been?" said he. "I took the lane that goes up the hill opposite the stone arch and all." "Oh, did you? Then you've been very near where Betton Woods used to be, at least if you followed up the top and out into the field." And if the reader will believe it, that was the first time I put two and two together. Did I once tell Phillipson what had happened to me? I did not. I have not had other experiences of the kind which are called supernatural, or normal, or physical, but though I know very well I must speak of this one before long, I was not at all anxious to do so. And I think I have read this as a common case. So all I said was, "Did you see the old man you meant to?" "Old Michael?" "Yes, I did, and got something of a story out of him. I'll keep it till after dinner. It really is rather odd." So when we were settled after dinner, he began to report, faithfully, as he said, the dialogue that had taken place. Michael, not far off 80 years old, were in his elbow chair. The married daughter with whom he lived were in and out preparing for tea. After the usual salutations, "Michael, I want you to tell me something about the wood." "Ah, what was that, Mr. Reginald?" "Betton Wood. Do you remember it?" Michael slowly raised his hand and pointed an accusing forefinger. "It was your father done away with Betton Wood, Master Reginald. I can tell you that much." "I know it was, Michael. You needn't look at me as if it was my fault." "Your fault?" "No, I said your father done it before your time." "Yes, I dare say if the truth was known, it was your father that advised him to do it, and I want to know why." Michael seemed a little amused. "Eh," he said, "my father was a woodsman to your father, and your grandfather for him. If he didn't know what belonged to his business, he'd ought to have done. And if he did get advice that way, I suppose he might have his reasons, mightn't he now?" "Of course he might, and I want you to tell me what they were." "Well now, Master Reginald, Rail makes you think I know what his reasons might have been. I don't know how many a year ago." "Well, to be sure, it's a long time, and you might easily have forgotten if ever you know. I suppose the only thing for it is for me to go and ask old Ellis what he can recollect about it." That had the effect I hoped for. "Old Ellis," he growled. "First time ever I heard anyone say that old Ellis was any use for any purpose. I should have thought you'd have known better than yourself, Master Reginald. Why do you suppose old Ellis can tell you better than what I can about Betton Wood? And what call have he to be put before me, I should like to know? His father wasn't a woodsman of the place. He were a ploughman, that's what he were. And so anyone could tell you what known. Anyone could tell you that, I says." "Just so, Michael. But if you know all about Betton Woods and won't tell me, why, I must do the next best I can, and try to get it out of somebody else. And old Ellis has been on the place very nearly as long as you have." "That he ain't, not by 18 months. Who says I wouldn't tell you none about the woods? I ain't no objection. Only it's a funny kind of tale. It ain't right to my thinking. It should be all about the parish. You, Lizzie, do keep in your kitchen a bit. Me and Master Reginald wants to have a word or two private. One thing I'd like to know, Master Reginald. What come to put you up on asking about it today?" "Oh, well, I happened to hear of an old saying about something that walks in Betton Woods, and I wondered if that had anything to do with its being cleared away, that's all." "Well, you's in the right, Master Reginald, however you'd come to hear of it. And I believe I can tell you the rights of it better than anyone else in this parish, let alone all Ellis. You see, it came about this way. The shortest road to Alan's farm lay through the wood, and when we was little, my poor mother, she used to go so many times in the week to the farm to fetch a quart of milk, because Mr. Allen had the farm there under your father. He were a good man, and anyone that had a young family to bring up, he were willing to allow him so much in the week. But ne'er you mind about that now. And my poor mother, she ne'er liked to go through the wood, because there were a lot of talk in the place, saying like what you spoke about just now. But now and then, when she happened to be late with her work, she'd have to take the short road through the woods, and sure there she did, she'd come home in a rare state. I remember her and my father talking about it, and he'd say, 'Well, but it can do you no harm, Irma,' and she'd say, 'Oh, but you haven't an idea of it, George. Why, it went right through my head,' she says, 'and I came over all bewildered like, as if I didn't know where I was. You see, George,' she says, 'it ain't as if you was about there in the dark. You always get there in the daytime, don't you?' And he says, 'Why, to be sure, I do, but he'd take me for a fool.' And so they'd go on. And time passed by, and I think it wore out, because you understand, it weren't no use to go for the milk, not till the afternoon, and she wouldn't never send none of us children instead, for she would get afraid. No, she wouldn't tell us about it herself. No, she says, it's bad enough for me, I don't want no one else to go through it, nor yet hear talk about it. One time I recollect she says, well, first it's like a rustling like all along the bushes, going very quick, either towards me or after me, according to the time. And then there comes the scream, as appears to pierce right through from one ear to the other. And the latter I coming through, the more I am like to hear it twice over. But thanks be, I never yet heard it 3 times. And I asked her, I says, why, that seems like someone walking to and fro all the time, doesn't it? And she says, yes, it do. Whatever it is she wants, I can't think. And I says, is it a woman, mother? And she says, yes, I've heard it. It is a woman. Anyway, the end of it was my father. He spoke to your father. He told him the wood were a bad wood. There's ne'er a bit of game in it, and there's ne'er a bird near there, he says. There ain't no matter of use to you. And after a lot of talk, your father, he come to see my mother about it. And she weren't one of them silly women as gets nervous about nothing at all. And he made out of his mind there was something in it. And after that, he asked about it in the neighbourhood, and I believe he made out something. And wrote it down in the paper, what very like you got up at the court, Master Reginald. And then he gave the order, and the wood was stubbed up. They done all the work in the daytime, I recollect, and were near there after 3 o'clock. Didn't they find anything to explain it, Michael? No bones or anything of that kind? Nothing at all, Master Reginald. Only the mark of an edge and ditch along the middle, much about where the quickest edge run now. And with all the work they'd done, if there had been anyone put away there, they were bound to find him. But out nowhere had done much good after all. People here don't seem to like the place no better than they did afore. That's about what I got out of Michael, said Phillipson. And as far as explanation goes, it leaves us very much where we were. I must see if I can't find that paper. Why didn't your father ever tell you about that business? I asked. He died before I went to school, you know, and I imagine he didn't want to frighten us children by any such story. I can remember being shaken and slapped by my nurse rolling up the lane towards the wood when we were coming back rather late one winter afternoon. In the daytime, no one interfered with our going into the wood if we wanted to. Only we never did once. I said, and then, you think you'll be able to find that paper that your father wrote? Yes, he said, I do. I expect it's no farther away than the cupboard behind you. There's a bundle or two of things specially put aside, most of which I've looked through at various times. I know there's one envelope labelled Betton Woods, but as there was no Betton Wood anymore, I never thought it would be worthwhile to open it, and I never have. I'll do it now, though. Before you do, I said. I was still reluctant, but I thought this was perhaps the moment for my disclosure. I better tell you, I think Michael were right when he doubted if clearing away the wood had put things straight. And I gave the account you've heard already. I need not say Phillipson were interested. Still there, he said. It's amazing. Look here, will you come out there with me now and see what will happen? I'll do no such thing, I said. And if you knew the feeling, you'd be glad to walk 10 miles in the opposite direction. Don't talk of it. Open your envelope. Let's see what your father made out. He did so, and read me the 3 or 4 pages of Jones which it contained. At the top were written the motto from Scott's Glenphillas, which seemed to me well chosen. Where walks, they say, the shrieking ghost. Then there was notes of his talk with Michael's mother, from which I extract only this much. I asked her if she never thought she saw anything to account for the seconds she heard, or for the sounds she heard. She told me no more than once, on the darkest evening she ever came through the wood, and then she seemed forced to look behind her as the rustling came in the bushes, and she thought she saw something all in tatters with 2 arms held in front of it, coming on very fast, and at that she ran for the stile and tore her gown all to flinders getting over it. Then he got the 2 other people whom he found very shy at talking. They seemed to think, among other things, that it reflected discredit on the parish. However, one, Mrs. Emma Frost, was prevailed upon to repeat what her mother had told her. They said it were a lady whom her title had married twice over, and her first husband went by the name of Brown, or it might have been Brian. Yes, there were Bryans at the court before it came into our family, Fullerton put in. And she removed her neighbour's landmark. Leastways she took it a fair piece of the best pasture in Betton parish, what belonged by rights to 2 children, as had no one to speak for them. And they say years after she went from bad to worse, and made out false papers to gain thousands of pounds up in London. And at last they was proved in law to be false, and she would have been tried and put to death very like, only she escaped away for the time. But no one can't avoid the curse that's laid on them that removes the landmark, and so we take it she can't leave the Betton before someone take and put it right again. At the end of the paper there were a note to this effect. I regret that I cannot find any clue to the previous owners of the fields adjoining the wood. I do not hesitate to say that if I could discover their representatives, I should do my best to indemnify them for the wrong done to them in the years now long past. For it is undeniable that the wood is very curiously disturbed in the manner described by the people of the place. In my present ignorance, alike of the extent of the land wrongly appropriated and of the rightful owners, I am reduced to keeping a separate note of the profits derived from this part of the estate. My custom has been to apply the sum that would represent the annual yield of about 5 acres to the common benefit of the parish and to charitable uses, and I hope those that succeed me may see fit to continue this practice. So much for the oath of Mr. Phillipson's paper. To those who, like myself, are readers of the State Trials, it will have gone far to illuminate the situation. They will remember how, between the years 1678 and 1684, the Lady Harvey, formerly Theodosia Bryant, were alternatively plaintiff and defendant in a series of trials in which she was trying to establish a claim against the Dean and Chapter of St. Paul's for a considerable and very valuable tract of land in Shadwell. On the last of those trials, presided over by Lord Chief Justice Jeffreys, it was proved up the hill that the deeds upon which she based her claim were forgeries executed under her orders, and now after an information for perjury and forgery were issued against her, she disappeared completely. So completely indeed that no expert has ever been able to tell me what become of her. Does not the story I have told suggest that she may still be heard on the scene of one of her earlier and more successful exploits? That, said my friend as he folded up his papers, is a very faithful record of my one extraordinary experience. And now, I had so many questions to ask for him. As, for instance, whether his friend had found the proper owner of the land, whether he had done anything about the edge, whether the sounds were ever heard now, what were the exact title and date of his pamphlet, etc., etc. That bedtime came and passed without his having an opportunity to revert to the literary supplement of the Times. And again, there's a little postscript to this one, in square brackets. Thanks to the researches of Sir John Fox in his book on The Lady Ivy's Trial, Oxford 1929, we now know that my heroine died in her bed in 1695, having, heaven knows how, been acquitted of the forgery for which she had undoubtedly been responsible. And again, I'm thrown for a loop. We're definitely not doing another one, so I'll move over to my, which got my comfortable bed for the last of this. But yeah, like I say, again, I'm thrown for a loop with that last post note. I said in the previous one that it being that, or rather, it talking about the mezzotint and the sort of previous one, that it made me think, oh, maybe these is more fictionalised stories, because obviously, if he's talking about another story he's written being similar, I mean, there's no reason to apologise for that if it's, you know, an actual account, but if it's a fictional work, you can understand. But then in this one, he's given a note on the historical context that is more properly found, which seems to lend credence to the idea of it being an account. Because why would you need more like historical context to an account of a fictionalised story? And maybe the fiction is based off an actual historical character, but it does make me wonder, doesn't it? But yeah, what else can we say on the subject, shall we? So, the story itself is, I mean, there's not too much to it. Obviously, you've got the, I mean, it's just a haunting that is a ghost pacing back and forth and screaming at people. And you sort of have a wood that is haunted and a folk song about it. Those are emerging things, and this old library, and the accountant. And obviously the old folk of the parish who know it. It's a pretty standard story. There's only really one, well, aside from the framing, which is a little bit interesting, having, you know, a secondary character accountant to our narrating character, but there's only really one thing that stands out to me about it, and that leaves me with a question. And namely that is, or rather that is namely, what happens if you hear it a third time? Like we see it with the narrator, the first time he hears it, it's an unpleasant sound and saps and short. But the second time it's screaming right in his ear and really gets to him. And when the old man who's recounting it tells it, he says his mother never heard it a third time and she thanks God for it. Which makes me think that if someone was to hear it a third time, something would happen. There'd be some unknown thing to it. Which really does make me sort of wonder. It feels like there's an hint to another bit of the story there, but we just don't got it. Which again makes me feel like, you know, I mean, maybe it is an account rather than a fiction. Because why would you hint at this and leave this part of the story and then leave it unanswered? I just don't know. I really don't. But that being said, I think that is, of course, the long and short of what we're going to be doing. Is anyone live? No. Yeah. Let's see. Skitters is live and Varys is live. We've raided Skitters before. We haven't raided Varys before, so I guess we'll raid the Varys, who is he's gambling. Well, he's doing a clover pit. But yeah, we'll raid the Varys. But yeah. But as always, I do thank you everyone for coming around. I very much do appreciate your stopping by. And yeah, those of you who've lurked, those of you who stopped, especially the tenner for subscribing, I very much appreciate that. But yeah, other than that, I do hope you have a lovely rest of your day, be that morning, noon, night, whatever time it is for you. I do hope you have a lovely rest of it, and I hope, I hope you've enjoyed it. And I, again, very much appreciate you being there, as always. And as always, ta-ra.